All right, if you're tuning in now, then if you're watching this after the stream, I would just skip forward like 5 minutes, probably more. I'm just going to give it some time for some folks to come in, and then we will get to what we're watching today. So, see if some folks come in here. Yo, Trevor. Welcome in, man. Great to see you, bro. Give you an air horn. Oh, what a disaster. Man, I need to upgrade my soundboard. What I'm using is this old, just like a piano thing, and the keys are like way too close together. So sometimes I hit the wrong thing. But great to see you in here, man. Just going to give it a couple minutes and see if some of the other folks come in, and we'll just get this started regardless. So hope you're doing well, man. I remember you came in last week, but you couldn't stay for a bit. But yeah, I hope your weekend was good last weekend, man. Let's see. Just making sure all this stuff works, man. We got Trevor in the house. Yo, Klaus, welcome in, man. Robert, man, we got everybody in here today. This is great. Big shout out. Guys, I think I might potentially have an exciting show for you guys today, but I'm really not sure. And it's going to be another Renn interview with this guy, Doug Wilson, who is a bit of a controversial figure, but it's called The Lie of Servant Leadership. And it's on this thing called Canon Press, which you can get like a free 7-day trial to. But there were some clips on YouTube that I saw. We watched an interview with, I think it was Renn and Stephen Baskerville. It was pretty good. Don't give up on old tech. I appreciate you being positive about that. Yeah, I mean, I like this thing. The reason I ended up with this was back when I first started streaming, one of my buddies, he's into music. And, yo, Arthur Dunn. Yo, hey, welcome in, man. Appreciate you seeing you in here, man. Let me give you one, too. I wish I had some better sound effects. You know what? Let me give you Supercar. You're going to be Supercar. You're Ferrari Arthur. Nice. But yeah, so anyways, yeah, my buddy, he was a musician, and he got me set up with the sound effects, and he was like, dude, just get one of these, any kind of MIDI keyboard, and I have all the keys freaking set up with sound effects. Some of them that I don't even really use anymore. I should probably rethink some of those. But yeah, man, Robert, dude, your comment on my video was hilarious, by the way. Sadly, the video is not getting many views, but that's okay. I made a video. I call it Child Support Story Time, so it's like a series. And I made one about a guy that had 14 baby mamas in the office, and it was just crazy. So anyways, yeah, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Doug Wilson. I'm just gonna give a little bit of background, but I watched this clip, and it was about how the church fails men. And, you know, this is from Canon Press, so I think it's like some kind of Christian organization. And it's interesting. The conversation's interesting, and it's all about how the church looks at masculinity and stuff. And then there's this guy, Doug Wilson, and he does a full interview. This is just a clip from it. So I got this. I signed up for the trial on Canon Press. There's a bunch of stuff on here. I don't really, I don't know if this is for me, but their conversation seemed really interesting. And we did see an interview with Renn, and I know that this guy is like, he's pretty up to date on the laws and how all these pieces fit together. And I could tell that by his interview with, I think, Stephen Baskerville. So it's going to be exciting. I don't know who, I don't remember whatever that comment was. I was probably drinking. Man, that's pretty badass. I mean, as long as you're having a good time, that's important. Hit the like button, lads. Oh yeah, please. If you guys can do that, that would help out the stream. But anyways, yeah, this guy, one of my buddies told me about him, and he's like pretty religious, but he likes this guy. So that's why I first heard about him. And I originally did a reaction where he reacted to a whatever podcast clip, and he seems to be a tradcon that sometimes calls out other tradcons, or at least the gynocentrism fully embedded in what is now essentially corporate tradconism. And I liked it, but then I later learned he does have some controversy, but it seems like he kind of came back from that. He had some comments on Southern slavery, and I guess he was trying to reconcile Christianity with slavery, and he was like, well, slave life was to the slaves a life of plenty, of simple pleasures, of food, clothes, and good medical care. In spite of the evils contained in the system, we cannot overlook the benefits of slavery for both blacks and whites. Slavery produced in the South a genuine affection between the races that we believe we can say has never existed in any nation before the war. So that got him in some trouble. He came back later and, I don't know, I guess tried to walk back some of that quote. I don't know if we got to get too into it. Then he gets in trouble for being crude. In the book, the author puts pornographic language into the mouth of the sex robot. So he's kind of a funny guy. I mean, he's been labeled as misogynistic before and says no one should speak like that, let alone a Christian pastor. Even so, in a report concerning 2 sexual abuse cases, a committee took issue with Wilson's language about women. So I think he oversaw some committee on that, and they didn't like what he said about it. Drug and gambling scandals, abuse scandals. So he's got a bunch of scandals, and I'm just telling you this just to be honest with you guys about who we're watching today. But, when you watch him, he seems like a perfectly rational dude, and that he doesn't seem that horrible. So I did want to be more forthright about that. So, yeah, essentially that's what we're looking at today. And Trevor asked how the week was. So, you know what, we'll talk about that a little bit, then we'll get right into this. Week was pretty good. What did I do? Man, I just worked a lot. I actually worked a lot this week. I went out today and I bought me a few clothes. I got a jean jacket because it looked kind of cool and it was cheap. I got a button-up shirt so I can be ready for the fall time with some long sleeves, and a pair of jeans that was on sale. So that was today. Other than that, I mean, nothing too exciting. Just made a YouTube video. Been trying to exercise because I'm like 20 pounds overweight, so I'm working on that. God, I wish I could tell you I did something exciting, but I really did not. So anyways, yeah, that's where we're at. So we're going to go ahead and watch this, and, just fair warning, I'm going to have to stop this, just in case for fair use. It is not on YouTube, because they're funneling people from here to their canonpress.com app. But you do get 7 days free on this, so, you can go on there. But then the problem, then it's like $11 a month, but you only get the 7-day free trial if you agree to be billed annually, which is like $120 immediately for 12 months. But you can cancel, so you can sign up for the free trial and then cancel immediately so you don't get charged $120. At least I'll confirm that in 6 days. So let's go ahead and just get into this now. I think we got plenty of folks in here. They ain't in now, then they're going to have to watch it later.
Welcome to Man Ramp.
Okay, good. So I can just click on this and we're good. So this is Doug Wilson. I might skip over the intro if it's a little long.
I'm Douglas Wilson. C.S. Lewis says somewhere, and I think it might be in English literature in the 16th century.
It might be too loud for you guys. I'm going to put it down. If you need me to put it up, just let me know.
That there has been a great shift in how...
Like 20 pounds. I guess it doesn't really look like it. I have been going on jogs, but I've been eating a lot of carbs lately and having some fun. And I'm a pretty skinny guy to begin with, so when I gain weight, it's just like I just get skinny fat, which is like the worst of both worlds. But, it's all part of the game.
We describe our cultural leaders. And when I was making that reference just now, I was deferring to our more contemporary usage. Lewis says that we used to speak of our rulers, while today we want to refer to them as leaders. And we naturally think that we understand why our shift is much to be preferred. The word ruler...
I'm just going to get right into the interview because that's where the interesting stuff is, and just get a little bit past this music. All right, here we go. Man Renn. Woo! All right.
Welcome to Man Rampant. Today we are very Pleased to have Renn with us. Aaron is an urban analyst by day and publisher and writer of The Masculinist, a newsletter, by night. I've found that newsletter to be very provocative and helpful, and you can access archives at urbanophile.com/masculinist. Is that right?
Right, absolutely.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to begin with the most outrageous thing that may be said this whole time. For evangelical Christians, conservative Reformed Christians, servant leadership is sort of one of those unquestionable, not just unquestioned, but unquestionable things.
This is going to be interesting to me. You know, I'm not super familiar with everything here, but for me, it's valuable to watch this because I think, you know, religious organizations, especially in the U.S., do play some role in shaping the culture. And, you know, it's possible if they all come to an agreement on something, they can have a pretty big effect on the politics here and maybe how people vote and being able to, you know, gather money and possibly even spend that on lobbying if they decide to. So I kind of see something like this as internally the church or that segment of society trying to figure out and process what to do about this. And the idea of servant leadership is what attracted to me, because you don't hear that just in a religious sense. I mean, you hear that whether, like, if you worked for government before, you know, you're a civil servant. It's about serving the public, leading through serving. And you'll hear government officials kind of talk with that same sort of philosophy sometimes. And I think they're going to be discussing servant leadership and how it applies to masculinity and kind of, you know, where they drop the ball on some of this stuff.
Everybody who could be against servant leadership. Is that phrase, or the way that phrase is applied?
Not sure if Dan the man's in here, but, you know, if a lot of you guys grew up with the church or anything, and, you know, if there's things I get wrong, you guys could clarify in there. But again, to me, this is important to watch because it just helps me understand these different pieces of society and how they fit together.
Today, open to criticism.
Well, it is, especially when we start unpacking specifically what's meant by it. It is interesting that you say it's part of the more conservative evangelical camp that you hear this servant leadership phrase. It seems to be mostly associated with complementarians. You don't hear the feminists or the egalitarians asking for servant leaders.
Right.
They seem to think that that's also kind of a retrograde notion. So it seems to come out of this complementarianism. And in order to understand it, I would say we first need to back up and look at the way that they define and think about masculinity, because that is the context in which servant leadership is embedded and in which it comes out.
Okay, so why don't we, if you could please define complementarianism.
Damn, I'm actually quite happy he's asking me to do that, because for a second I'm like, I can't remember what complementarianism is. That's some high level stuff right there.
Right.
And then masculinity.
Yeah. The Bible.
Define masculinity. That might be kind of tough. You'll probably go with biblical masculinity or some flavor of that. Someone asked me how I define masculinity on one of my streams a couple weeks ago. And, you know, when you think about it, that's a tough thing, especially nowadays when there's a kind of a war on masculinity, for masculinity, who gets to define it. That's where the power is, you know, defining masculinity. Are you doing that yourself? Is some organization doing that? Is Andrew Tate doing that for you? Who's defining masculinity?
Bible has all of these passages in Scripture that talk about things like wives submitting to their husbands, or talk about women not being able to be an authority over men in the church. And there are two main schools of thought in Protestantism today over how to interpret those. The egalitarian position basically argues that those were culture dependent or in some other way, and essentially no longer apply in their straightforward way. So we essentially have gender equalism.
Okay.
And complementarianism basically holds that those are still in force, and they have a model in which essentially men and women are created equally in the image of God, but they have complementary functions in the home.
Okay, that makes sense. I think I read about that like once before. It sounds familiar. And I'm not super familiar with that, but I know there's different kinds of churches, and there's just different kinds of things they support. Like some would allow women to be pastors and this kind of thing. And I don't know if those are Presbyterians, but that sounds like the more egalitarian one. And then complementarian sounds like probably the ones that follow it more closer to, I think it's Ephesians 5 is what he's talking about here.
And in the church, and that's why they call it complementarianism.
Okay. And are there any other options other than egalitarianism and complementarianism?
Well, complementarianism as a theology.
By the way, I definitely got this backwards. I mean, the clip I saw, I think it might be more of a discussion, but I guess it is formally him being interviewing him. I did think it was the other way.
Theology seems to be of pretty recent provenance, pretty recent vintage. It was really coined. The term was coined in the 1980s.
Okay.
When a group of
not by Augustine.
not by Augustine. I would say prior to that, there wouldn't have been a lot of thinking about models and like what you would call it. You know, society was essentially default patriarchal.
Okay.
And so the church sort of went along with society, but as society was shifting into post-industrial culture and shifting into a more egalitarian concept of gender in society, this kicked off a period of debate within the church, which sort of led to these essentially two warring schools
within the
thought.
church.
Yeah, essentially
Okay.
within the church.
Okay.
It's interesting to think about how religion kind of evolves, you know, because you tend not to think about it, but when you really do look at history, you do see how the living, you know, religion in terms of the people and does kind of change to accommodate, sometimes not even intentionally. Almost kind of reminds me of like mission creep or something. And then it just changes over time, kind of like in this example here, basically. And one thing I was thinking about today is, you know, there's like, you see like Christian nationalists and they want to go back to, you know, where there's an official state religion and something that was more akin to previous to what we have now. And I was thinking about how we were talking about this in the Discord, actually, about how religions like that or societies that are religious might even be more better suited for a monarchy, you know. And concepts like democracy didn't really get reintroduced back into Western society till about like the Enlightenment period and post-Renaissance. And that's where concepts like freedom and egalitarianism, you know, equality and all these kinds of things started to come in. Social mobility, you know, you can start as a peasant and become a merchant and then suddenly you're high status, you know, if you're successful and marry in a higher family. And suddenly there was social mobility like never before. We got the peasant uprisings, got rid of the nobility in a lot of countries. And, you know, we got separation of church and state and all these kinds of things. So to walk it back to something maybe what Christian nationalists want, there is this conversation of, I mean, are they, you know, is democracy going to change? Are people giving up their rights? And all these basically Enlightenment ideals, do those go away? Yo, Will, welcome in, man. Good to see you. Beard guy is rocking his finest boots. Yes, he is. They're pretty cool, actually. Those are some nice
the
boots.
Egalitarians much more interested in being reflective of the current cultural norms, and the complementarians, I would say, being interested in preserving some of the formalisms of the patriarchal age while essentially imbuing them with many of the spirits of the egalitarian ones.
So
That would make sense, because complementarianism, though it does seem a little bit more truer to kind of what's literally probably in there, it still has to make this argument of like, well, but both sides are equal though, so it kind of does match with the egalitarianism, but it is different.
if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying the egalitarians have joined forces with the spirit of the age. The complementarians are paying secret tribute to the spirit of the age.
Right. I mean, in some respects, yes.
Okay.
In some respects, yes.
I'm sure we'll tie this up later, but how would you define masculinity?
Well, I like to first
question.
go to the book Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, which is sort of the earth.
You know, that, sorry to interrupt him, but that kind of seems like a thing that might be a good question. Like for most influencers or any influencer in here, you know, how do you define masculinity? Like, what are their personal, I feel like that's a video or a question maybe every influencer should have or make on their channel. Like, how do you define masculinity, and what exactly are you advocating for as far as change goes? It would at least be interesting to hear that, because there are a lot of big channels where sometimes, like, I do wonder what they personally think about it. Robert says, what about the figmentarians? People who want to design society according to figments of their imagination. Well, I was thinking about the Fig Newton-mentarians, but yeah, that's kind of interesting also.
Text of complementarian movement, published I think in 1991 or thereabouts, edited by John Piper and Wayne Grudem. And in that, John Piper defines masculinity, and I'm probably getting the exact quote right, but it's something like, the essence of mature masculinity is a benevolent concern for leading, providing for, and protecting women in ways appropriate to men's various relationships.
Okay.
So, he kind of based the definition of masculinity on women protecting and providing. That was in there. So that is fundamentally tradcon. Someone left a comment on my video about the dowry. He told me to check out someone called Barbarossa. And this guy Barbarossa has a channel called Bar, B-A-R space B-A-R. And he's been making videos. Like, I was listening to a video from like 12 years ago. He was talking about traditional relationships and feminism, and it was really good. But one of the things I don't even know if he meant it as a standalone term, but I heard him say female validated masculinity. And I thought the term female validated masculinity is a good way to describe a lot of how people do view masculinity, at least in the gynocentric sense of being a utility, serving, protecting, and providing. It's still deriving its validation from women.
So in essence, they define masculinity almost exclusively in terms of relationships with women.
There you go.
Your masculinity is expressed through the way that you relate to women. It's very limited to that context. Whereas that's not necessarily the way that traditional masculinity was conceived.
Okay, see, that's interesting right there. I'm glad he pointed that out. And I'm interested to hear what he discusses is the thing that led to this change. Is it going to be the rise of chivalry? Where's my book on the Reformation? Dang, it's over there. It's out of arm's length. This is a good book. I got this way back in college, like over a decade ago. But it's about the European Reformations and a lot of the stuff that contributed to it. And one of the things is the invention of the printing press. So aside from like Bibles and different kinds of religious pamphlets, particularly being made by like Martin Luther and people looking for reform, as time goes on, you start to see a lot of like stories and novels, and kind of it really made popular the idea of chivalry and romantic chivalry, and people started reading them even all the way up into the New World. People were getting their hands on copies of these books because books became cheaper and easier to make. And these changes in the culture, these changes in how people view morality led to these kinds of changes like he's talking about now. So let's see what he says.
So Brett McKay, who's a Mormon, he runs the great site Art of Manliness. Okay. And he does a lot of great, almost like book report type essays on different topics about masculinity. He went through and looked at all of the historic ways that human societies have tried to define masculinity to try to come away with very common themes that arise out of them. Okay. And he distilled it down to what he called the 3 Ps: protect, provide, and procreate. And these are superficially similar, I think, to what Piper said. The difference is in the...
Yo, shout out to my buddy It's Demon in the UK, watching me all the way from the UK. We got Klaus in Germany. Trevor, I can't remember. I think you're in Australia, right? So pleasure to have all you guys in here.
In the complementarian definition, it's very limited to relationships with women, whereas traditional masculinity, it's much more oriented to the totality of the community. And we see this in the way that was expressed and how it was demonstrated. So, manhood was something that you had to earn. It wasn't something that you had. You had to demonstrate in the hunt or on the battlefield that you had what it took. You had to display autonomy of action, big energy. You had to demonstrate risk-taking, courage under fire. You had to be in the arena, competing with other men, trying to display your provision of masculine attributes in sort of a competitive spirit. And being a homebody, being too focused on your family, in a sense, marked you as somewhat less masculine. You were too overly domestic. And so, in a sense, you're not just providing for your wife and kids. You're not just protecting your wife and kids. You're providing and protecting for your entire community. In a sense, it's your
civilization.
Your civilization. You are building the civilization. Your acts of masculinity are towards the building of your civilizations.
I was just watching an old live stream from Coach Greg Adams where he's reacting to Matt Walsh basically attacking the red pill. And Matt Walsh is angry because red pillars are not happy with marriage, and he's basically saying they're telling men to not get married and that it's a bad deal. And he's saying that marriage is, a building block of civilization, and he's selling it in that way about it being for more than just you, but it also keeps all civilization together. But the other part of that is, with doing all of those things that a man, according to them, is supposed to do, there's supposed to be things that you get back in return, whether that's authority or control over certain things of your life or your family's life as a man that we don't get now.
Which throughout many human societies was essentially about just survival. Much of human history was very, very harsh. So you had to defend your village or your tribe against outside raiders. You had to get food. Most of human history, almost everyone worked in food production of some sort. And as you got beyond that, you got to think about other civilization building activities. And this is where I think there's one element.
And so that's interesting. We talked a little bit about that in the dowry video, right? Because he's talking about how almost everybody was working on food. And, for a large part, a lot of us still work very hard just trying to get our basic needs met. But both men and women worked pretty heavy, in the fields. And it took agriculture becoming more sophisticated, and technology in agriculture becoming more sophisticated in order to create a food surplus, which then led to an excess of calories, an ability to do other things, to trade with, probably neighbors, and create all kinds of other industries and a lead to urban life. But prior to that, it was mostly just small farming, like using light tools, and women were a big part of that. And when that happened, typically, since they were productive economically in that sense in the field, those civilizations would pay a bride price. And that's the ancient Hebrew Israelites, Mesopotamians, ancient Egyptians, a lot of the ones we're familiar with. But then as the plow was invented, it could do a lot more efficiently, but it was harder to use. Typically, a man would have to do it. But you can make a lot more, you can get a lot more crops out of that, basically a lot more income. And men kind of took over that because it was just more suited for them. It was harder for women to do. And if women participated, they just wouldn't make as much. So you can get so much food out of this that it just opens up free time for other things and other possibilities.
That McKay maybe misses, it's only implicit in his content, and that is the idea of mission, in a sense, mission. And we see this, I think, much more clearly in the Bible, where Jesus came to earth. Why did he become incarnate as a man? He had a mission to accomplish. Paul had a mission to accomplish. We see something, I think...
Adam was given a mission.
Right. He was given a mission.
Subdue the world,
Yes.
Go out there and take it on.
Yes, given a mission. We think we see this most clearly in the scriptures in what I think is the best treatise on masculinity in the Bible, which is 2 Timothy. You have Paul writing essentially a man-up exhortation to his protege, Timothy, who's kind of in a bind, probably in Ephesus. Paul himself is in prison. And so he's writing this letter almost from father to son. And what is he saying? He's saying things like you need to be strong. You need to elevate your game and hold yourself to a higher standard. You need to cleanse yourself from unrighteousness so that you can be a vessel fit for honorable use by God. You can be of use to the kingdom. You need to hold fast to the truth so that you're equipped for every good work. You need to fulfill your mission, which in his case is ordination of preach the word, and you need to endure hardship. And he sends all those messages, and he says, by the way, let me model for you how to do that by telling you what my situation is and how I am responding to it. And so that's what I think is a great model of mission-driven masculinity.
And so that's basically, a biblical masculinity at that point. It's interesting kind of hearing that, because you can kind of think like, what was masculinity before, that got popular, and then how did it change? And the first thing I think of, the closest thing I guess I can say I've read that might answer that question is this, and this is Friedrich Nietzsche, late 1800s, and he was a philologer or a linguist, and right before that we have essentially ancient Greek ideals, which are then supplanted and taken over by this, what he just described. And masculinity in ancient Greek culture might be more like he described earlier, with being strong and on the battlefield and all these kinds of things. But then it changed. Virtue, which originally did refer to a soldier. I can't remember exactly, but I think the Greek word is erete. That Nietzsche says that changes after Christianity, and virtue goes from that. The idea of strength and power goes from that into like being righteous, like he kind of mentioned here. These more biblical terms, they kind of co-opt. I don't use the word hijack, but they kind of took these old terms and they spiritually flipped them to make masculinity and strength mean something that was different from how the ancient Greeks understood it. Now we're at this place where, even this system, after how, over 1,000 years has been here, even more, and it's starting to dissolve away. That's what Nietzsche would call the God is dead, the twilight of the idols, the old ideals. With God being dead, these old things that held up the morality of society is starting to rot away, because the ground that keeps it alive isn't there. That was what he said. And now we're in this place where people are trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like? What does it look like? Because the ideals around us have been largely eroded.
Okay, so if I'm reading you right, you're saying that the 3 Ps would be maybe a tougher sounding version of what Piper was arguing, because protect, provide, was it protect, provide?
Protect, provide, procreate.
Procreate. All of those could be interpreted in light of a men's relationship to women.
Right.
Protect the women, provide for the women, procreate with the women.
Female validated masculinity.
But what you're doing is adding this larger mission focus.
Help society.
The culture, the cultural mandate,
Right.
which makes it much larger than individual households, men and women.
Right. In essence, the servant leader concept is what happens when you turn a man's mission into exclusively service to his wife and children. That becomes a man's mission, and that is what servant leadership becomes. And so I think that is where it arises from this idea of defining masculinity almost exclusively in relationship and how men relate to women. And when in fact there's much more to it than that.
When in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul says that the man was not made for the woman. And if I'm getting you right, you're saying that servant leadership, as popularly applied, is basically turning the man's mission into that. The man was made for the woman.
Basically, that's essentially how it is. Much of the description of masculinity in kind of Christian thought today is essentially in the service of something else, generally his wife and kids. There's the idea of, if you reach the man, then the family will come with you. That's one of the ministry strategies. So why are you reaching the man? Well, it's not necessarily to save him. It's to save his wife and kids. So it's sort of like you can only think of men and masculinity as essentially a conduit for some purpose having to do with women and children.
Okay.
And that's probably something of an exaggeration, but I think that thematically comes through in the complementarian literature and the way that they talk about it.
So but Paul says the man was not made for the woman, but for the woman for the man. So if you looked, an illustration I've used over the years is,
I wonder what the justification for that is. My bet would be it would go back to Adam and Eve, and Adam was there, and and by himself, but then he wanted a companion, and gave up his rib for that, so the woman was made for the man. And that,
if you look at a book written by man for men and a book written by a woman for women, the plots are fundamentally different. The book by the man is what's the mission? Well, to get the gold back, or to get the cattle back, or to win the war, or win the battle. And it could be something by Homer, or it could be Louis L'Amour.
One thing I wonder if they'll touch on, I'm guessing probably not, but it's like, what if a man is defined by protecting the 3 Ps, as he said: protect, provide, procreate. Let's say, slaying the dragon for the princess. What does a man do when the princess doesn't want to be saved anymore? And, the sort of feminist boss babe, that they can do that stuff mostly on their own.
It's mission focused, and the woman enters from the side to help get the gold back, or to, the plucky rancher's daughter, comes in and helps. In the book by a woman for women, the relationship is the plot. So first they like each other, then they don't like each other, then they like each other again. And it could be great literature, Pride and Prejudice, or it could be some, Bodice Buster. You get it Safeway. It follows the same trajectory. So a man's orientation is to the world, right? Like Adam's orientation is to the garden. The woman's orientation is to the gardener.
Yeah, I mean, you might say that is really more like maybe a masculine and a feminine mode of operating. I think this is where I think complementarian got sideways. People say, well, you're telling me women can't have missions?
Right.
Well, perhaps they can, and we could talk about that. But you definitely see these 2 different modes of operation, and in terms of personalities and what toys people play with when they're babies, and all the scientific studies that have been done, men tend to operate more in one mode, not exclusively in one mode, and,
right.
and women have tended to operate more in another mode. Although again, they're not hard and fast, no exceptions to the rules on the boundaries.
And actually, the self-selection, or what men choose to do and what women choose to do, is one of the reasons for the wage disparity between men and women. So men make different choices, and women if a woman wants a flexible schedule because she wants to focus more on home or where her kids are, that sort of thing, that has economic consequences, down.
That sounds kind of like, just explanations for the wage gap, and kind of reminds me of Jordan Peterson. I think he put out a lot of that stuff. Also kind of reminds me of that one guy. I can't remember his name, but he worked for Google, and there was like some sort of internal memo or something leaked where he mentioned some of this stuff. And then he was like let go from his job, or there was some controversy there. God, that was probably a good 6 years ago, maybe. Takes me back.
Downstream. So you can't just take an average of all the men are paid this and all the women are paid that, because you'd wonder, well, why aren't all the corporations hiring women to cut costs? Well, because it's a function of what the women actually want. Well, and speaking of which, I wanted to go on to the next thing. Do you think that one of the ways that servant leadership is currently touted is that women are going to love this? This is everything from this is a great aphrodisiac to this is the way to really make your wife happy, or the woman in your life happy. In my experience, watching couples and counseling many couples over the years, it often drives women crazy. It exasperates them. What's your take on that?
I would say servant leadership is really 4 separate things, if we think about it. One is it is a model of how attraction between the sexes works, and it's a false model.
Okay. Just flat out false.
It's flat out wrong. Secondly, it is, again, a defining of a man's mission as service to his wife and kids. Third, in some respects, there's an almost prosperity gospel-like view of the family embedded in it. And then the fourth is, I think, in many ways, the vision of marriage that many of its advocates put forth is so unappealing.
It's interesting, that he says it's a false model, like servant leadership is a false model. And you kind of get to this point where you can see people will either use religion or science to almost justify complete opposite things sometimes. And servant leadership is like a gynocentric style of, I guess, creating masculinity as utility for the woman and the family, ideally. Or you might see that from people who claim to use evolutionary biology. Well, you know, there's this many sperm and then only one egg, and these are disposable and this and that. And sometimes it seems like people just kind of throw that around, and they're really more just confirming their biases than it maybe being actually true for how it should be. And maybe how it should be isn't even grounded in anything biological, but more moral to begin with, and changes with time.
Feeling that can actually turn men off on marriage. And I think we see this clearly in the fact that so many of these preachers frequently express their frustrations over why the single men in their pews are not pursuing the women in the congregation for marriage. And like, if you listen to what they would say a marriage is, it's often not surprising that they might make the decision to put that off for a little bit more.
So we've identified the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
And I almost want to equate servant leadership there with with simping, because he's saying it kind of like turns the women off when the guy kind of does that. So he's saying it's a false model, and defining masculinity in that way is creating this problem in the church where the people are just not getting together, the marriages aren't working. And that's the interesting thing. I'm wondering, he has this probably burden of trying to reconstruct this to change it, but then have it simultaneously grounded in the religious belief, you know, scripture and all that stuff. So I'd be interested to see how he does that, which is like a 180 change, you know. So you think you attend a church, one church, let's say one church is from the normal one and the other one is run by him. You got like a 180 difference in prescriptions about how to go about life coming from the same, you know, text or scripture or doctrine.
If
not doctrine, but, you know, scripture.
So you would say let's go back to the first thing you said there, that the model assumes that servant leadership is attractive. It's going to tie attractive to women. You say that's false. What's false about it?
In the servant leader model, basically there's this idea that women want to be with essentially very godly men who affirm, support, provide for, encourage, etc.
Were there for me.
For their wife.
Probably emotionally, you know, there as a kind of emotional crutch a lot of the times. And I don't know, it sounds like a different kind of providing that's not just like, you know, a sort of warrior style.
And that basically, I think, is wrong because it mixes two concepts together.
Okay.
There are really two categories of things we're looking for when we're looking for, you know, a partner in life. One, we're looking for things that make an attractive person, someone that attracts us to that person. Secondly, we're looking for things that make that person a high-quality marriage partner for us. And so it's...
And you know, I think a lot of this conversation, this is like the church trying to absorb the truisms that's come out of Red Pill, because Red Pill has spent a lot of time just trying to see what cultivates attraction between men and women, like, you know, and they'll have things like, you know, passing shit tests and you know, abundance mentality and all these kinds of things, dread game, you know, what drawing attention, that holding frame or whatever, that creates attraction in women. And there's a lot of guys comparing notes to show when attraction failed or died, and that stuff is so hard to deny, and it's so obvious, you know, that it works. And at a certain point that we're at where we are now, so now he's trying to reconcile these two things together, because the blue pill, in a sense, is more classic tradcon thinking, at least what we're more recently used to. Robert says, women want godly men since when? Well, that is what he's trying to help out.
It's not necessarily the case that many of the things that make someone a marriage eligible kind of person makes them attractive, even though you need to have those. Yes, you need to be godly. Yes, you need to be kind. yes, you need to have all of these attributes, many of which are servant leader attributes or be embodied in the model, but that doesn't make you attractive, right? And if we look at what makes someone attractive, we see it's all the same things anyone could easily identify from just looking at secular culture. It's power and status, it's confidence and charisma, it's physical attractiveness, it's resources such as money. And I think we see it very obviously. Why did Melania Knauss marry the much older Donald Trump?
I think maybe he probably could have added just like how someone holds themselves and their specifically their interactions with women. Like, are they going to give in every time they're challenged or shit tested for a woman, or are they gonna be willing to stand their ground and not care if that person leaves them or not, and this kind of thing, So I think that could be something I think would be added that would make sense, because you can have all those things and then have the guy still get cheated on, you know what I mean? Someone with money and looks and status and like a Tom Brady or something, and we saw that happen to him. We saw that happen to Tyrese Gibson, Brendan Fraser, and I think if a red pillar was looking at it, they'd say, well, they were blue pilled, and that kind of led to a diminished attraction between the two.
Is it because he was this amazing servant leader? I don't think so.
Okay.
Right? So
so you can take all those things, then give them servant leadership, which they're almost using as a euphemism for simping. Like there's almost a correlation between simping and servant leader. I know it's not the same, but I can see a lot of that kind of dovetailing with it. And then that leads to women being kind of pushed away or just not attracted to that.
You just look around, are women more likely to be interested in the church music leader or the church janitor? And so godliness comes in at a point at which, we're already decided that we're attracted to this person. It doesn't generate attraction. I think Paul essentially implicitly admits this when he says, don't be equally yoked together with unbelievers. Why would he caution against marrying unbelievers if godliness was sexy? So when you have like a pastor who says, as one person did, godliness is sexy to godly people, I keep saying it. No, it's not. So
and it seems like what it reminds me of what he's talking is kind of like people who virtue signal they think that I guess you can say white knighting or agreeing with the feminists, going to the protests with them in hopes of thinking it's going to make them like you. Having the right opinion is not enough for that, and by right whatever they would think is right.
Men hear that. They try to operate on that. They try to display characteristics like godliness.
And I see guys like that too that are just very religious and still alone. And it's like, man, I know a guy who goes to church every week, and it just doesn't make sense. I'm like, man, why? You would have thought somewhere at that time he would have met a nice girl in church, has his own place and do that, but he does operate under a very kind of tradcon moral framework, so it's not cultivating attraction
and kindness to women, and they're frustrated that it doesn't work. Then they open Jordan Peterson's book, and Jordan Peterson says, well, women, who are your friend, they might like that, they might think it's neat, but they're attracted to men who win status competitions with other men.
Okay.
And so it's like, well, which one is a little bit closer to the truth? I think that
this goes back to the lobsters.
Explains some of why guys like Jordan Peterson are drawing people by the thousands, even though they're saying rather banal things. Whereas, some people in the church, it just seems to be constant frustration about why we're not reaching men, why we're not having marriages, etc. So I think we have to distinguish between things that make you attractive and things that make you a good marriage partner. And the same thing is true. The same thing is true for women. Men are attracted to women for one set of characteristics. I think it's very clear from all the research that's been done on online dating sites and elsewhere. It's almost overwhelmingly youth and physical appearance.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, film at 11. I know that's a stereotype. I know you had trouble believing it.
Yeah.
And then, again, you could think of the Proverbs 31 type characteristics. What makes a good wife?
Okay.
And so you have to have. People are looking for a combination of both. They're not just looking for. Maybe at some point we'll all think, oh my gosh, it's almost too late. I need to get married, and we'll start settling for someone who's less attractive if they have.
that would be kind of like running into the wall. Will says Jordan Peterson is good when he's just giving uncle advice, like clean your room and have discipline. Besides that, he's mad. Yeah, he's pre-Daily Wire. Jordan Peterson was I liked him, but post contracted Daily Wire presents Jordan Peterson is very different.
At these other characteristics. But I think in our ideal case, we're looking for somebody who ranks highly in both sets, and the servant leader crowd does not completely distinguish between those two sets and focuses overwhelmingly on what would make you good husband material, as opposed to what would make you attractive. They intermix those.
You know, so he's kind of described what he says is the problem there, and it's that so it's too focused on this. But then another question is, why would it be too focused on that and not focused on the cultivating the markers that drive attraction? What is it about the culture or the way the church views this that makes them stay away from that, and it's putting the men at a disadvantage in there?
Yeah, what would make you a good husband is not the same thing as what would make a woman marry you.
Right. Or would want her to be
or attract
interested in you in the first place.
All right, so how would you...
And it's like you can flip this and look at this, like, let's say not from a religious view, but let's say someone on the complete other side of the ideological spectrum, like someone who, let's say, is a liberal guy that agrees with all the feminist talking points and is there at all the marches, and they're like, yeah, we stand with her. You know what I mean? And he can have all the right opinions and the right morality, but it's not going to cultivate attraction between, you know, the women that he's standing next to in the marches, unless he has a lot of the same markers of attraction that, you know, Manosphere, Red Pillars will talk about. And it works, you know, kind of all across. Like, there's these similar things that you got to have cultivated, and it doesn't matter if you're a really godly man or you're a really liberal progressive man. Without these other things, it's, you know, you're still going to get looked over.
Answer the objection. I think what you're saying here is compelling to me, but one objection comes to mind, and that is someone's going to say, yes, but what you're talking about is worldly. That's how the world works. The world cares about status and power and charisma. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't Christians look at the heart? Shouldn't Christians be concerned about not those worldly things?
Mm-hmm. Well,
that's an interesting question in itself too, because a lot of what, like, the tradcons like Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles will kind of, I guess, shame people with a bit is, you know, oh, you know, what about your legacy? You know, you should be having kids for your legacy. You know what I mean? But then you can look at other times through the church history where there are many decisions made by Christians in order, because they're more concerned with their salvation in the afterlife instead of what's happening now. And you can go through the church history and see times where Christians would donate all of their wealth to the church while they're on their deathbed instead of giving it to their children to continue on the quote-unquote legacy, because they're more concerned about securing salvation for themselves. Now, that's before Protestant Reformation and all that kind of stuff. But there seems to be changes in culture, and like now Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles are trying to adjust by appealing to a man's selfish ego that's more worldly and material here instead of spiritual, and in the next, you know, existence, you can say, by appealing to that. So it always sounds weird when it comes from like Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles. Yo, Mr. Pitt, man, big shout out to you, man. Glad to see you here. Thank you. Yes, please like the video if you're watching. Helps this get discovered. Hope you're enjoying the discussion.
Yeah, I distinguish between maybe 3 separate categories of thought. You know, there's how things are, there's how we would like things to be, and then there's kind of what God says we should do. And I think the Bible is very realistic about those different things. The Bible doesn't sugarcoat what's reality.
Right.
Okay. Now, sometimes the Bible tells us to operate in a mode that's very different from reality. For example, somebody cuts me off in traffic, and my instant...
Yo, Caesar, glad to see you here too, man. Back in the good old days, you mean before the Reformation? Oh, man. Thanks for joining.
Response is,
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read this book in years, but I was kind of thumbing through it again, the European Reformations. And, I know one of the major, I guess, issues between the two, and I'm probably going to butcher this, is the people on the side of the Reformation didn't like this. It's like once you're saved, then you're saved, versus like still needing to do stuff like where the church would give like indulgences people could pay for, and you'd have to do these things in order to ensure salvation, versus, just once you're, saved and then all that kind of stuff. So that could lead to things from the church kind of finding ways to extract more resources out of especially particularly rich people at the time with a lot of land. One thing you might not know or might be interesting to know is that if you look up what organization owns the most land today, it is actually the Roman Catholic Church. And a lot of that land was accumulated from being gifted the land, pretty much through people's wills, either if they didn't have kids or they were more concerned about their salvation than their, the legacy they're leaving behind, their kids and all that kind of stuff.
Want to go scream and yell at that guy, maybe pound on the hood of his car, cut him off, show him, get him back. But what does the Bible say? The Bible says never take your own revenge, right? It says do good to those who hate you. So things like that. So it's like,
sounds like turn the other cheek.
Okay, great. We're not supposed to respond in kind, but the Bible doesn't say pretend that thing over there didn't happen. So I think we need to recognize this is, right, how people actually behave in the real world, right, which we see clearly in the Bible. It was Jacob who wanted to be with Rachel and not Leah because she was beautiful and, Leah wasn't. And so it's like, okay, this is reality. Okay, so we need to face that reality. Now, if you want to say that Christians should behave differently, then I think you can make that argument. But you need to be explicit, that's what you're saying. And you need to be explicit about the consequences of that in the real world. And so I think there's reality. But I also would say is there's nothing wrong with going to the gym and trying to get in better shape. What's wrong with trying to wear more stylish clothes? What's wrong with trying? So I think many of the things that make for.
I guess maybe traditionally they would say if it's serving a vanity or something like that instead of maybe a practical purpose or something.
For attractiveness are like, they're not evil things. So why wouldn't we cultivate them? Why wouldn't we cultivate every aspect of our lives? Why wouldn't I want to be more professionally successful and higher status in my career? That's not an evil goal. And so I think this idea that everything has to be reduced to some, if it's not an explicit God thing, then it must be evil. I don't think it's true. So there's nothing wrong with cultivating those
I can easily imagine in the contemporary church scene, if a woman said to her girlfriends, I think I really need to lose some weight. Okay, her friends all rallying around, you go girl, we support we support everything you do. But if she had said, I think I need to lose some weight in order to be more marriageable, that would be treated like with hostility. Do you think that's fair?
Well, there's certainly a lot of push to try to.
It would probably, at least be met with like, what are you talking about? You're beautiful. Like there would be a lot of this kind of, just kind of covering up of the obvious to. I guess you could, I don't want to say lying, but yeah, kind of like that. Where, it makes me think like even just probably like 50, 60 years ago, that same conversation would lead to them saying, yeah, you could probably shed a few pounds, and it might help, Klaus says, so the tradcons are now advocating for self-improvement. Now I've seen everything. Yeah, well, see, that's the interesting thing about this, because it's like a lot of stuff they're talking about is very clearly stuff that's come out of the manosphere. At least I think so. I mean, it very much has. And I think what Aaron here is trying to do is find a way to reconcile that with, a biblical grounding so that the church can push some of this stuff. But at the same time, they're still contending with a secular legal system that is going to make it harder for the man who is solely the provider and for a woman who's a stay-at-home. I mean, the attorneys will tell you that. So on the one hand, okay, they're telling the guys to try harder and maximizing these attraction markers. So they're adopting, some of the self-improvement guru talk, but I've still yet to hear about the women on the other side and what the church would do in regards to, these outside pressures on marriage that incentivize women to leave them. Because so far, I mean, I don't see this anything past, self-improvement and guys holding masculine frame and the 3 Ps, which he says is wrong. He does say servant leadership is wrong, but then he is also advising cultivating, these standard markers in order to be more attractive. But let's see where he's going with it. I don't want to be too early on this, so we'll see.
Subvert some of the standards of beauty in the world that have been traditionally there. There's the sort of the fat acceptance movement. There's others that
the single mom acceptance movement and these kinds of things. Because again, I mean, and I think what a lot of red pillars, a lot of MGTOW guys who've been in this space for a while understand is you can maximize all those attraction markers, and you can use it to get women to like you and, sleep with them or not, or do whatever you do. But that's all, in my opinion, that's all fundamentally short-term engagement. So you can maximize attraction markers and you'll be able to avail yourself of short-term interactions with women. And what I mean by short-term is not even just time, but low commitment relationships, low leverage, not wanting to commit and have kids and all that stuff. But then when it comes to the long-term of it, now leveraging what you have, tying the knot legally with the marriage, having kids, then it gets different. And they're not talking about the back end of the deal. Right now they're still talking about the front end. So what happens on the back end when the guy ends up getting divorced? What is the church going to do for that guy? What's the church going to do about this broken family? Yo, it's Fitzy. Welcome in. Great to see you in here from the Twitch. Glad to see the Twitch getting some love. I know that one typically does not get much, but thanks for coming in. I do remember you. I remember you from a while ago. I don't know if you subscribed back when I was playing Super Mario Maker. God, that sounds fun right now.
are there. And again, I think social reform movements, a lot of social reform movements, there's nothing wrong with being in a social reform movement. If you say, this is how people are, this is how they should be, then there's nothing wrong, if you truly believe this is how it should be, with working for that world. But you have to realize that in the meantime, you live in this world. Mm-hmm. And so...
you've been here since MGS1 days? Oh, man. I appreciate that. Those were fun. I haven't played that game in a while. I'd have to go. Maybe I'll go back and stream that on Twitch. Yo, Trevor, big freaking thank you for the generosity. Teaching men self-improvement is the equivalent to teaching the hungry how to cook in the depths of a famine. It's going up to like a poor child and saying just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Just, don't let the hunger bother you and, do what you got to do. And listen, at the end of the day, I think everybody wakes up and is always focused on self-improvement anyways. Like, I don't think self-improvement's bad. I think there should always be a lane for it. The problem I have with what I call the self-improvement maximalists or the self-improvement gurus, I love coming up with these terms, is that what they will do is say, if you do this, it's going to like solve your problems and you're going to be good. And, if you just will pull yourself up by the bootstraps and then be a winner and you're going to be fending off all these women looking for relationships. But then it's like when you look at the most hyper masculine self-improvement guru people, like even Andrew Tate's, like Andrew Tate had to leave. Regardless of upping all his stats, he had to go to Romania. He couldn't stay in the UK because even with all his masculine everything, getting married in the UK still isn't worth it to him. Getting married in the US still isn't worth it. So prescribing self-improvement for men's collective issues, I think is it's just not deep enough to the core of the problem. What's more of a collective systemic issue. especially with the laws and stuff. I think it just at best helps men with maximizing short-term options, but it doesn't help the long-term back-end problems. But again, thank you so much for the donation, Trevor.
Until you're in this other world over here, you're going to be in that transition period. So again, we can't just say, here's how it should be, and just ignore how it is.
Okay.
Right. And so I think that's one thing. And I'd say, look, it's a free country. People are free to do this. In America, you're free to do what you want for whatever reasons you want. We don't have to listen to what other people tell us. Right. If people
and that notion of freedom is part of what creates all this anyways, because I mean, it's like you have women or men or whoever that you have the freedom to step outside of your traditional role at any time, and the government's going to help you do that and keep your right to do that. So that's where you get this whole bait and switch problem going on. It's if it says you live in UAE, no, I'm here in California. Only been through UAE once through transit. Oh man, thanks for the Twitch donation. Thanks for the bits. I haven't got a Twitch donation in a long time, so I appreciate you keeping the Twitch alive over there.
People say, it's like the old crab bucket thing, pulling you back in.
Yeah.
If I'm going to the gym, doing squats, and people say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that or whatever. Well, I don't have to listen to them.
Right.
So again, my focus is more on men and what men are doing.
That's who it was. Yo, Darts Sidonius, welcome in here. Big shout out to you. James Damore. Yeah, I couldn't remember his name. It was James Damore who used to work at Google. Funny thing was he was trying to find ways we could encourage women to work in executive positions. Yeah, that sounds familiar. So he was actually looking into the studies to try to help women to be more successful in executive positions. And he sent this memo out or something, but Google and all the women there apparently took it the wrong way, and they let him go, and it became a big thing. It was kind of like the first chink in the armor in a lot of this stuff that then I think led to a wider conversation about this. I can't remember if he was pre-Jordan Peterson or what it was, but it was like around that time. Thanks for reminding me.
And so I just think you have to operate in the realm of reality, in a way that's consistent with Christian principles and biblical ways of living.
So again, he's talking about operating in reality, and he's talking about attraction and getting these church girls to like you. The other part of it's going to be the back end, what Coach Greg Adams would call the bait and switch. So now you've worked on that, because he's talking about a problem of the guys can't even get the chicks to begin with. That's one thing. That's another thing. But then you got guys who can they're with women, they can get women. But either they go all in and it turns out bad, or it's just not worth it to go all in because they've seen it, the statistics and everything just line up against it. They've seen too many horror stories. And what happens, what are they going to do about that issue? That's what I'm more interested to hear
So
from.
as you focus on
Yo, Robert. Big shout out to you. Big shout out. Thank you so much. I could even play my other cash thing. Wow, big money here. We got the cash register. We got coins flowing in. Uh-oh. Thank you so much for $20. Very, very generous of you. Thank you, Robert. Do woodchucks actually chuck wood? I think they do. Because they're named that. Are tradcons actually traditional? Maybe woodchucks don't chuck wood then, actually.
Men, telling them that cultivating the characteristics of servant leadership will not make you more attractive even to Christian women, despite what you're hearing from the pulpit.
Right.
Okay? This is the sort of thing that you've been emphasizing in the newsletter, The Masculinist. And you referenced the outpouring of the surprising response that Jordan Peterson got just for saying commonsensical things and refusing to apologize for them. What sorts of responses are you getting from Christian men to your newsletter? What kind of feedback are you getting?
I would say mostly very positive. in all of my work, I've always made a point to walk through very thoroughly why I've reached certain conclusions. And so I think that my thought process is there. And a lot of times if people disagree with the result, they can at least say, well, he had a reason why he got to that. And
he's not crazy.
You know, there's things that we need to think about. I've gotten very positive feedback. The truth is not many people have unsubscribed. And my open rate and my readership rate has been pretty off the charts.
I do hope he talks a little bit more about the back end issues, not just with cultivating the attraction in men, but what happens, the incentives women have to leave the marriage, and those aspects of the system that are tough on men, especially with custody and child support, alimony, all these kinds of things. And the reason I'm so interested in the church conversation about that is just because I believe they could be a force to get that changed. I mean, let's say if a lot of the churches kind of came together on this, and they collect donations, they collect money from their congregants. I don't know the exact economics of the church. I don't know if they're sitting there worried about paying for real estate all the time or whatever other activities they do, but I'd like to think they could form probably one of the most powerful lobbying organizations in this country to perhaps get some of this stuff done. Of course, if it's them who does it instead of anybody that's something that's secular, it's going to have some kind of a tradcon bent to it. But if it's better than what we have now, I can live with that. But I don't, it depends on what they do and what they can actually affect. But that's why I'm interested. And I hope they don't skip that in this conversation.
Compared to any kind of...
Because then if they don't have that, what you have to say is that, like, if your wife left you or, whatever it was, that, well, you must have just not been attractive enough. You know what I mean? Like, she just lost attraction for you. And if only you would have self-improved harder and held, masculine frame and did all these things and had more power and more resources and whatever it is, that he mentioned earlier, that somehow you were faltering from one of those. And it kind of just puts the agency completely back on men instead of the system or women.
Newsletters I've ever seen on email. And so I actually almost feel like I've been not controversial enough. Okay. And that if I'm not getting if I'm not getting enough people unsubscribing, maybe I'm too conventional wisdom. Mm-hmm. But then again, I don't want to just be a flamethrower just to be a flamethrower. I want to try to be as fair and as accurate as I can be. And not everything is critique, by the way, in my newsletter. I mean, one of the things about Jordan Peterson, as I watched a lot of these secular men's self-help gurus and why they're attracting these big followings, one thing I noticed is they're not just haters. They're not just saying, here's all the terrible things that are going on in society. They've all got a positive agenda. Mm-hmm. So you can think about Jordan Peterson. He's telling you things like, stand up straight with your shoulders back. Well, your dad should have probably told you that, or your grandfather, but people aren't hearing that today.
I really like Jordan Peterson, especially in the beginning, because I still, maybe I view him almost like a Darth Vader figure, where there's still, some good in him, and maybe we'll see that at the last hour. But, in the beginning especially, like, he really did resonate with young men, and it's like he was someone that you can tell talked to men and understood maybe on a visceral, emotional level the challenges young men were facing. So when he was coming up, young men really gravitated towards that. Then he kind of went into other stuff, and it's different now. Now he's Daily Wire presents Jordan Peterson. And I remember when they kind of came after him. But I liked him a lot in the beginning. Coke addiction, welcome in. Shout out to Coke addiction. When professional Christianity was created, a conflict of interest was also created. Yeah, that's kind of a tough thing too, and you can kind of see this in the history. There's several evolutions, you can say, or changes. In the beginning, Christianity was a sect, and then it becomes the state religion, and then things change. And a group of people that are a sect within a greater civilization behave and act differently for their survival than the state official church religion does, because then at that point they're at the top. But then what happens is secularism takes over, and it unseats that power of the church and puts the state in instead. yet the church still fundamentally operates as if it is, you know, the official state religion with actual political power like it used to have. And in truth, it's almost more like a sect at this point. But even beyond that, I think maybe what you might be referencing is the kind of corporatization of a church. Like, I think that might be what you mean when you say professional. The leadership is beholden to the women who put money into the offering. Well, yeah, that's another thing. And it's kind of like politicians being beholden to the women vote. I mean, I think they might even outnumber us at this point. And the way the church works is based off donations. And a lot of religious organizations are like that. So they're playing a juggling game of, you know, we have to cater to them too, because if we don't, then they might leave. And this is how you get things like the Catholic Church that, you know, there's not supposed to be any divorce, just annulments. But their congregants can go to the superior court, the secular court, and get a divorce. And then they can get remarried through the state marriage license program. And typically what that would lead to, especially once someone starts fornicating outside of marriage, is, I don't know if it's an excommunication, but they can't take the Eucharist anymore. I think that's one of the issues once that happens. Whether or not they're divorced, but if they still haven't been with anybody, but once they do that, then the church has to fundamentally kind of cut them out like that. But what they do now, and more recently, the Catholic Church changed how they handle annulments. And I feel like the annulments within the Catholic Church is kind of their version of accommodating no-fault divorce. Because if what they'll do is just say, well, let's just annul this because they were too young and they didn't understand what they were doing. I think that's the common reason, even though they might have been like 22 when they got married. And then this allows them to come back in and be able to take their Eucharist or whatever and participate in the church, and then probably also down the line give money. But you can see these little adjustments that are made in order to cater to them. So yeah, that's a great point. Robert, big money. Big thank you, sir, for the generosity. The problem with problems is that they are problematic. That is an unfortunate issue with some of these issues, is they can be quite problematic. Someone ought to let the feminists know they'd be busy for years. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but maybe some folks in the chat can help me unpack that. It sounds very profound. That is very, very profound. Dart Sidonia says, Peterson, you were the chosen one. You were supposed to defeat the gynocentric order, not join them. Bring balance to marriage and relationships, not leave it shrouded in one-sided, I don't even know what to say there, in darkness. Sorry, couldn't resist after that comparison. Yeah, man, that was a great movie. I haven't seen that in years. That movie came out when I was in high school, and I can't remember. Did I see that in theaters? I don't know. I don't think I did, but I got it on DVD after, and it was pretty good. Man, YouTube is trying to get me to play ads, and I'm just not about playing ads on the stream if I can help it. But if it gets me with an ad and it starts playing it, we'll just take a break. We'll just talk, wait for the ad to go away, and then, just so be it. Actually, in Germany is different. If you're a Christian, you get taxed by the state for the church. So they are not dependent on donations. Wait a minute. So they're not tax exempt over there? Because in the U.S., if you're a religious institution, you have a tax exempt status. If you're a Christian, you get taxed by the state for the church. Oh, okay. So the state taxes you in order to fund the churches. I see. Okay. That's actually really interesting. That's really interesting. So I guess you would identify as Christian in whatever your official government paperwork is. Kind of like we got a social security number here or something, and maybe part of that system in Germany, you say, okay, I'm this checkbox, and then the government says, okay, we're going to tax you a little bit, and that kind of goes in to fund the churches or whatever your religious needs are. That's a really interesting system. There's a lot of things I learned about Germany today. I did read your posts in the Discord today, Klaus, which are really interesting. Which reminds me, I should put a Discord invite in the chat in case there's anybody who wants to join. We have some fun conversations in there. I just ask that you remain respectful. I just want people to be in there and have some fun, you know what I mean, and just have some interesting conversations. But Klaus has been talking about some really interesting things about the sort of religiosity in Germany and the people that I found pretty surprising. And he posted some pretty cool German. It's all in German, so you might want to use Google Translate. But statistics. Now, how do I find the invite? I always feel like a boomer every time I use this. Here we go. Send a server invite link to a friend. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Oh, damn, I don't know why I got rid of it. Okay. Caesar Quintana with the... let me just put this in here real quick, just so the folks got the Discord. All right. Star Wars reference. Big shout out. I appreciate that. That's hard-earned money right there. So I do want to respect that. You know, another thing I wanted to do was child support consultations. I had a few people call me, and I had some good conversations with them. And by call, I meant like have a video thing over Instagram or whatever it was. And, you know, they told me their stories, and it's just like, some people I can help with advice. Other people, I think the most help I can give them is telling them exactly what's going to happen, just so they can brace for it before. But I don't want to charge for that because I'd feel bad about it. So I'm thinking about doing it basically donation-based. And I guess from a selfish perspective, if it's donation-based, then it's like if I can't make it, I can be like, I'm sorry, I can't make it. Forgive me for canceling. But it also kind of reminds me of my old job a little bit. And, you know, there's just something in my mind where it's like I did this for a while and then like my body unconsciously keeps doing it or feels good about it a little bit. So, but they were positive conversations and I appreciated that. But I might figure out a way to do that or do some kind of, I don't know, video or something where I advertise that. But again, it's, you know, donation based would probably be the fairest way because people dealing with child support, you know, I don't know if they're rolling in dough. Have you read the book, The Church Impotent, subtitled The Feminization of Christianity? It came out in 1999. I have not read that book, but I am going to open that up here in a tab so I can look at this later. The Church Impotent. Feminization of Christianity. That looks pretty good. And it's interesting that it's written in 99. I would be interested to see what the prevailing mindset was back then. But I got that up. That sounds like a pretty good book. Again, thank you so much for the donation. Patrick Kun, Shah, yo, Patrick, welcome in, man. Glad to see you in here, man. I appreciate you. All right, let's go ahead and get back to it. Uh-oh, I didn't turn myself around. All right, here we go.
You know, his famous dictum is, most famous is clean your room, bucko, right? Clean your room. Well, Navy SEAL Admiral William McRaven gave a commencement address at the University of Texas in 2014. I think it was Texas. That went viral, and his big tagline from that was "Make your bed." In fact, he wrote a book called "Make Your Bed." Right after it's that, you know, pick friends who have your best interest at heart. It's amazing to me, right, how banal Jordan Peterson's advice is, but so much of it just saying things like, "Oh, by the way, the real world is hierarchical." Mm-hmm. Hierarchies are an inherent part of the world. You can't.
This gets into the lobsters.
Cannot escape hierarchy. Living, oh wow, like this guy's some kind of a prophet. When he's not a prophet, he's just saying the most banal things. But there are things other people are not saying for whatever reason, and then people tune into him, and they get drawn into his bad metaphysics. Right? This is a guy who can't give a straight answer to the question, do you believe Jesus Christ rose again on the third day?
That's so funny that he says that. And the reason is because basically like the end of my journey with Jordan Peterson was he came to Sacramento and I got a ticket and I went to go see Jordan Peterson in downtown. And I saw him live. I think this was 2017, late 2017 or sometime in 2018. It was a Wednesday, and it was really crazy. I mean, this has nothing to do with Jordan Peterson, but I went on a Wednesday. That's when the Jordan Peterson thing was. And then afterwards, my buddies and his dad owned a steakhouse. It was like a steak restaurant in downtown. And I got out of the Jordan Peterson thing at like, I don't know, 9:30, 10-ish. I hit my buddy up, and they were there, and they had some people, they had some sales representatives from Hennessy that were at the steak restaurant. This is in downtown prime real estate. That were there, and they were, they're selling their Hennessy to this restaurant. And I went downstairs below the restaurant, and everybody was smoking cigars, and I got a cigar, and that was nice. But the other thing that was nice was one of these sales representatives, they had a bottle of Hennessy that was made when Napoleon Bonaparte still walked the earth. That's when it was put in the barrel or whatever. And they offered me some. I'm not really a drinker, you know what I mean? But I had a little bit of this Hennessy. And, man, that was a crazy Wednesday night. And then Thursday I went to work. And the weirdest thing about this Hennessy was, for the first time in my life, I felt like this twinge. And I was like, what the hell is going on? I couldn't figure it out. And I realized I was having a craving for more of it. And I was like, oh, my God. Thank God this Hennessy is so expensive for a shot and that I can't afford it, because I do not want to have those kinds of addictions, I guess you can say. But yeah, anyways, the reason I brought that up was because someone in the audience after the show asked Jordan Peterson. This is when he was rising. He had the meteoric rise. And they were like, do you believe in the literal crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus? And I swear to God, Jordan Peterson took 30 minutes to answer that question, and I still he didn't answer the question. Like, it was a very famous Jordan Peterson thing. Yo, Robert, big shout out. Thank you. Thank you for the generosity again. Drag queen Letta Kickin braves unsubstantiated dangers to perform for children at main LGBTQ event. Google it. I'll have to see. That sounds like Letta Kickin, drag queen, braves unsubstantiated dangers. Okay, I get it. Because it's not dangerous. Well, I guess. Maybe if there's like violent counter protesters, is that what they're getting at? I don't know. Okay, we got a spam chat. All right, so anyways, yeah, that was and the reason, after I saw Jordan Peterson in real life, I remember thinking, okay, my Jordan Peterson arc is done. Like, this was the penultimate Jordan Peterson experience, and like I couldn't even listen to another video of Jordan Peterson. Like, I was done. For years I was done, up until kind of seeing him around recently. But then he had his whole thing when he was in Russia, and he was getting the treatment, and all these things happen.
Okay. Right. He's a famous video clip of him just going. I mean, apparently, it's almost famously, if you ask him that question on Twitter, it's insta-block.
Right.
Right. So he's not a Christian. I think it's just.
That's why I kind of liked Jordan Peterson in the beginning, was because what I did find fascinating is, prior to all the stuff that made him famous, like, I do remember his channel, and he used to have like these really cool, like, psychological explanations of like the famous, mythologies. And he'd have like these esoteric explanations of different biblical stories, and even stuff that wasn't biblical. And it was just interesting because it related back, and you can kind of, his interpretations of them, they were kind of Jungian in a way. And I thought, like, this is fascinating, because I used to like studying about religions and things, and different non-literal interpretations of religion and all this kind of stuff. So it kind of dovetailed into that. And that was how I started to like him. But yeah, he's moved far away from that.
Very clear he's not a Christian. And so you get sucked into a pattern of belief, kind of new agey, I would say. Almost all of these secular guys are either atheist or have some sort of new age belief system. And they're using as bait to get them sort of banal but true things. And that's one of the things I just said, look, we have to be saying the things that are obvious and which are well supported, factually, that are just not being said, in the church. And more stuff is like coming out that demonstrates this stuff every day, particularly all the research coming out of online dating sites and people's behavior on them.
Okay, so now we got the intersectional dynamic. Yo, Caesar, again, big. I need like a sound effect. I mean, we gotta get it exciting in here somehow. Oh, wrong one. Okay, we got the horn. You know what? I'm just gonna keep it classic. There's an old saying, never meet your heroes. Man, I think about that a lot. And yeah, it would, I used to really like Kanye West. Like, his first 3 albums are amazing. Like, I love Kanye's first 3 albums, College Dropout, Late Registration, Graduation. I could listen to those now, I'll be honest. But I had this specific time realization in my life where I realized, like, man, if I ever met Kanye West, I don't know if I would. I want to like his music from afar, and I don't know if I'd ever actually want to have a conversation with him, because I feel like it would be kind of like he would just kind of launch into things, and it'd probably be a hero I wouldn't really want to meet. And then, you know, the rest of the stuff about Kanye started happening.
What would you say is the difference? Because there really is a curious phenomenon here. Mm-hmm. When you're tough on men in a certain way, mm-hmm. the men eat it up. They mm-hmm. eat it up, like your Marine mm-hmm. drill instructor was tough on you, mm-hmm. but there was a value in it, mm-hmm. right? Jordan Peterson is, tough on men. Mm-hmm. You know, he's straight talk to men, mm-hmm. or the Admiral, or during Mark Driscoll's heyday in Seattle, that was the thing he was known for, attracting young men to his church by letting them have it, being tough on them. But there's another kind of being tough on men that is repulsive to men.
I'm glad he brings that up, because that's exactly what I was thinking, I think people hear being tough on men is good, and they just run with it all the way to where it's just like complete shaming for no reason. I think the good kind of tough on men revolves around things like mentorship. Having a mentor, I think you're lucky and blessed if you have good mentors in your life. And as a young guy, it's like, I'm grateful for whoever I had in my life that served a mentor role, whether that's your father, whether that's like a trainer at work or a coach, or something like that. And those are guys that are trying to help you get better at something. And when I think of the mentors in my life, I don't even particularly remember them shaming me or anything like that. Maybe, I don't know, nothing that I could think of that was bad or disrespectful, but it's like someone you admire, and it's like they're taking the time to help you. They want to teach you about their craft. And it's just, that is just a very, very good thing. But then there is the negative side, which I think is how people take it. They don't give you mentorship, and all they do is shame you to pull you up by the bootstraps or something like that. That's actually what men need. Robert says, but the feminist tough on men is just being mean to men. Yeah, exactly. It's just shaming and being mean and dismissive, where an actual mentor is not doing that. They're being attentive. They really are caring in a way. They might be tough on you. They probably will be tough on you, but it's tough from a kind of almost like a fatherly kind of perspective. And that is a very important thing. I don't think I've ever met like an older person that wasn't excited or willing to tell me about the craft that they do or what they do. You know what I mean? Like I do photography, and or child support or photography or whatever it is. Like, people ask me about it, I'm very happy to talk about it, especially cameras. I love going over that stuff and talking about it with people. And I don't know, it's cool. It's cool to teach people a skill. It's cool to learn a skill. But let's see what he's got to say.
It seems to me that if you are in the mode of men can't do anything right, and you get kicked around if you go to church, it seems to me that's men desert that. They don't want to put up with being a godly male is impossible.
Right. Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because Driscoll's ministry imploded.
Right.
And I think Driscoll essentially was sort of the parody of the other two guys that you mentioned. Peterson is very clear that he feels empathy for the young men and their struggles, and he's like, I need to help them. He actually shows a concern for them. Mm-hmm. In the military, they break you down, but they also build you back up. Driscoll was much more, I'm going to break you down and just keep breaking you down, and there was never that much building up. So I think that's part of, you have to give somebody something that they can use. I mean, I say, like, look, get in the gym and start lifting weights. Oh, if you do that, you're going to feel so much better about yourself. That's what I say. My first therapy is like squat bar therapy. It's like one of the first things I would just say for anybody. And so I think that's the difference, is that the church's men's ministry, for whatever reason, I think it's an interesting juxtaposition between the Jordan Petersons and the Joe Rogans and the Chapo's Trap House and all those guys. They've had so much success reaching men, when the church has basically, clearly, it's been well known that the church attendance skews heavily female. most church ministries towards men have been unsuccessful. They've kind of come and gone. Promise Keepers, you probably remember the Promise Keepers, where, kind of in the Where Are They Now file.
That's interesting that most of the attendance is women, and there's probably like a helpful chart or a graph that would show over time how that's changed, and I bet we can maybe even make some conclusions about what might have happened around that time. But yeah, it's interesting to hear it from that, and the fact that the Joe Rogans and Jordan Petersons and even the Andrew Tates get so much attention is kind of proof in itself of the failure of the church to help men, especially in their congregation. I kind of wish I could find other conversations from different religions kind of having the same conversation, especially if they're experiencing the same problem, which I would think it's the same across the board. But I'm interested to see the similarities and the differences that they're doing to kind of attack this problem. Is it the same or is it different? If I ever go bald, I want my head to look like his. It's like the perfectly bald head. Well, maybe you'll look like Kratos from God of War. That's like one of my favorite bald individuals. Coke Addiction says, Father's Day sermons are always be better and shaming men. Servant leadership. I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh, but I could just imagine going to church on Father's Day and then just getting like basically lambasted with that. Servant leadership is the only doctrine taught. Mother's Day sermons are about how wonderful women are, and they are superheroes and just amazing, and they do so much, and it's just underappreciated. Man, I saw something that really worried me. One of my good buddies from high school, I haven't talked to him in a while. He's got 2 kids now with his wife. And, man, on Instagram, we all kind of follow each other. And, Instagram has threads now. And sometimes when you're scrolling through Instagram, it'll show you the threads. And, if you have an Instagram, it'll sign you up for the threads or whatever. And she posted a post on the threads. I didn't like it or anything like that. But I screenshotted it because it kind of worried me a bit. And it's just like he's got a decent family, he works hard, and does what he's got to do. But she said, why does everyone keep saying stay-at-home mom is a full-time job? And she says, I'll tell you this right now, it's not a 40-hour week kind of job, because they're also working night shifts and every other shift in between without a pee break for free. And then she hashtagged it, stay-at-home mom life, overtime, working hard. And, man, that kind of worried me for my friend. It's like, man, for free? Wait, for free? I don't know. Like, when she said that, I'm like, oh, man, I ain't going to say nothing because that's just me. I don't say nothing. But I was just like, damn. Like, it's just like if your wife posted that, how are you as a husband supposed to feel? And it's like, I know this guy personally since I was like 14. And I know how hard he works. And it's like, I don't know, like it's almost like saying you're being unappreciated, and it's like it just seems like publicly lambasting your husband. But anyways,
and you can think about again Mark Driscoll, the other kind of signature. Really, it's not the.
Yeah, he's paying for everything. I mean, what do you mean free? Like, what about having a place to live and having your children have a roof over their heads, and not to mention, it's like they will make it seem like you just go to work and after 40 hours, like you're done. This guy works more than 40 hours. He owns his own business, but it's like every single guy I've seen, no matter how busy they are when they're at home, they're helping out with the kids too. But forget about that. I mean, there's all this stuff around the house that needs to be done. Like you got to maintain the cars, make sure the oil's changed, make sure the tires are good. If the alternator goes out or a battery goes out, one of them, you got to deal with that. Mowing the lawn, cleaning the gutters. If it's a particularly bad storm, you got to make sure that the shingles on the roof are good. If you're in the bathroom and then the faucet starts making that sound because one of the knobs is getting loose, you got to go in there and fix the seal on that. Maybe there's a little leak here, or the little flush toilet thing broke. You got to go to the Home Depot or whatever and buy another one of those and connect the chain on it. I mean, there is a ton of things. If the outlet's out, you got to, okay, to turn off the circuit breaker, figure out how to get these outlets wired and everything. There's a lot of around the house stuff that the guy has to do also. You know what I mean? And it's like, what are you talking about? Is he paid for that? Is he not paid for that? Does that not count? You know what I mean? So it just mind-boggled me. And I hope to God everything's all right there. I'd hate to see him get run through the run-through. You know what I'm saying? But I just saw that and I was like, interesting. Yo, Cesar Quintana, thank you again. Much appreciated. Every single dollar is hard earned, especially in these times. So I want everyone to know who donates that I do respect that. I do respect that. And I pray to God that I don't become one of those people, if I got more blessed in this endeavor, that forgets the value of a dollar. I know how you feel, Shah. My longtime church friend has 6 kids, and his wife posted a picture with their friends captioned "Ladies' Night." Oh yeah, that's ooh, God. I hope you didn't see like the location update to Las Vegas or something. Yeah, it sucks to see, especially when it's like a good buddy and like you see it firsthand, and you're just like, ooh, you know what I mean? Oh, but yeah, I hear that especially. Man. Oh, I feel like that's even worse than the other one. You can't even rank them. They're both bad. That's funny. It doesn't actually post the emojis. No, you know what? It'll post it in the YouTube chat, but I'm using a separate app called Twidget so I can get it to interface with my streaming software. So that has to take, it just takes it like that. It doesn't come straight from the YouTube on this. But anyways, yeah.
Servant leader, the signature teaching on gender in the church in the last 25 years was purity culture, which is now essentially recognized by everyone as having been a disaster. And there's been essentially no accounting for any of these failures.
Man, I'm sorry to go back to this. I know he's talking about important stuff, but I watched my friend, literally, he has a 2-story house. There was a leak coming down in the kitchen. You could look up, there was a leak coming down. And that's because the master bathroom was above that. And there was a leak kind of in the drain of the pipe that went down. And I watched him saw into the drywall, fix the leak, get that retextured and repainted. And it's just to think, like, working for free, is more than a 40-hour a week. It's just like, what about all that stuff? Does that not count? Coke Addiction says, men then go to church to be lectured by a guy who is being paid to lecture him about how much he needs to spend time with his family. Yeah, after all that stuff, right? Oh.
And by accounting, I don't mean, making people ritually fall on their swords saying, right, I screwed up. Although that seems to be what Joshua Harris, who wrote the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye, is doing. I don't hold him responsible for that. He was 21 years old when he wrote that book. It wasn't him who made that purity culture a phenomenon. But it's interesting. Nobody said, well, what went wrong in...
Oh, beautiful. See, that's what I wanted to hear. Like, what went wrong? What happened? What led to this servant leadership sort of takeover?
These things. Sort of like after an airplane crash, we have the NTSB investigation. We haven't had the NTSB investigation into what happened so that we can make changes so they don't happen in the future. And so, again, they just sort of get memory hold. It's like people don't talk about that. We'll airbrush Mark Driscoll out of the Politburo photo. And I do think there is the case in which essentially the church is tried to reach men unsuccessfully. And, Peterson's going to come and go. Like every story arc of fame, right, it just rises and falls. But I think it is interesting that there's been so much success by these secular guys. So there ought to be some study of what they're doing and at least understanding how they're being successful.
So if you looked at a...
That's interesting. So like they see guys like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate, and they're like, how can they get guys that are quote unquote, on their side with the church to have that much appeal to young men? And they're watching. I kind of have this thing where I believe like a lot of organic movements, especially as they get bigger, they tend to get hijacked. And that's kind of what happened with the manosphere. You know what I mean? It happens with any organic movement, and it's like the Tradcons are trying their best to place these manosphere guys like if they're an unruly child in a classroom, like sit in your desk, just pay attention. You know, we all need to just serve the conservative good as far as the political machine goes and the industry goes, and they want to put us under the umbrella of that. You know what I mean? And they do it in certain ways. They can offer money. You know what I mean? They can offer contracts. They did it with Jordan Peterson. He got hijacked. You know what I mean? He got bought out by the Daily Wire. But it's interesting because oftentimes when you see this, it always comes off as like artificial. It's almost like rap becoming big, and then maybe seeing like, I don't know, like a church version of rap, or like heavy metal or something that maybe they didn't used to do, but they're like, you know, we got to find a way to appeal to these kids or whatever. And it seems like a similar thing. But again, this is an evolving thing. In 10 years, we might see a whole host of influencers that are kind of born from this sort of think tank going on right here in front of us.
Marine Corps recruiting poster.
Yeah.
There's the toughness. We make you jump out of helicopters.
Right.
And there's the glory. Here's a Marine in his dress uniform.
It's honor.
We honor you.
It's about honor. It's about duty. It's about answering the call of your country. It's about being one of the few, the proud, the Marines. It's about being, you know, again, pride, maybe not such the great thing to think about from a biblical perspective, but again, this idea that you're aspiring to achieve this high level of masculinity in which much is expected of you. We honor it.
Honor it when you do it.
Right. And
yeah, you got to be honored. And it's like even in past times, I mean, if you're a soldier, there are spoils of war. There's booty to be had. You know what I mean? And it's like if you're a knight or something like that, and you know, if you like learn about some of the like I think the greatest English knight was like William Marshall. There's this, I can't remember his channel name, but he's this English guy. I love his channel. And he has like videos like what they used to, how they would operate on someone who got like shot from an arrow or something like that. But he has a whole episode on William Marshall. I'll see if I can find it. But it's like with every successive battle or victory these guys do, I mean, the king comes and he's just like, you are now given this amount of land here that produces this amount of income. You are now from a knight to a lord. Like things, real tangible things happen, you know, when you go out and put your life on the line like that. So I just got to see if I can find this video because it's pretty freaking cool. William Marshall life. Damn, I could hear my cat. I might let her in. Nah, Dan Davis. The History Squad. I love this guy. He's my favorite, like, well, I got a lot of favorite YouTubers, but this is like one of my favorite history guys. Let me just put that in the chat. But yeah, nowadays, you know, there are some things maybe you can get from it, but I'm just glad he mentioned about honoring, not just honoring when it gets back, but actually, you know, making good on things and making your life better, making it worth it.
And you achieve honor through doing it.
Oh crap, I put the complete wrong link in there. It's just the, whoops, my bad guys. 1 second. Copy. I feel like I'm just a boomer using a computer right now. It's like, what in the high hell? It just keeps doing that. Share. Copy the link. Okay. You've got to be kidding me. Okay, there we go. Up, and it didn't work. I ruined it one more time. Sorry, guys. I'm having a real moment here. I did skip lunch and dinner. That's my excuse. All right, there we go. If you guys get interested in that, it's a pretty cool documentary on William Marshall and his life. Okay, so let's get into this. Oh crap, I missed some comments. Sorry about that, guys. Klaus says, oh crap, the NTSB analogy, I think that's with the plane, doesn't work like that. Then they would have to look into why the church can't attract men, not why other guys can. Oh yeah, like as far as the plane crash goes, like what is it that they're doing wrong? Yeah, that's what they're gonna have to do. I feel like we're watching them trying to process this, and you know, and I'm very interested to see like what they're going to do. Like what is the trajectory going to look like? I wish I could get my hands on the plans, you know what I mean, from somebody's some desk somewhere. Coke Diction says the church stopped preaching about brotherhood. It was replaced with the social gospel. That's an interesting point. Brotherhood is a good point. As a servant, you are absent of authority and responsibility. To be a leader, you need authority to be responsible. A servant leader accepts the servant's authority and takes on the leader's responsibility. Yeah, or lack thereof of authority. It's responsibility with none of the authority. And that is supposed to be the trade. If you're going to do that and take the risk, it should make you a leader in the truest sense of the word, not a servant. And when things go wrong, you're the one who's accountable. You know what I mean? And if things go good, then you should receive the just due for that as well.
Most of which honor comes through your fellow men. The women may appreciate you for it, but you're really earning the respect of the other men in doing that.
Let me rewind for a minute. You made reference to purity culture. We've attacked servant leadership. Now let's attack purity. Surely you're not against purity.
Oh, this is going to be an interesting conversation right here. I was just kind of thinking about that today, and the emphasis on virginity. And it's just, unless people are going to get married young, it's just are people going to hold that to the average age of 27 to 30 when they're getting married now? Probably a 99.99% chance that they won't. And if they do, that's interesting. It's almost like eyebrow raising.
Well, it's interesting.
And I don't want to be the guy, I don't want to shame that, but it's just it almost, if you're going to do that, then you might as well get married early.
That they went for that. I wasn't around in the purity culture era. I was not a Christian in that era. My wife was, and she would talk about how awkward it is with men who would want to give you a side hug. And when I read I Kissed Dating Goodbye, I read some of the things, trying to get a sense of maybe what did go wrong in there.
You read it late?
Yeah, I read it recently, within the last couple of years. And I just read it. So I'm trying to get a sense of what was going on and what people were thinking. And I think a few things are clear. And Joshua Harris clearly recognizes one of them. One, they conflated biblical teaching with life coaching. He doesn't use that exact term. And that's one of the clear demarcations I think we need to make, is to distinguish when we're talking about what the Bible says we should do, what God says we should do, with mere advice about how we should live. The majority of what is being said about relationships and such, when a Bible scholar and serious theologian says, friendship is the greatest aphrodisiac in marriage, he's not speaking as a Bible scholar. He's speaking as a life coach. And so,
an erroneous life coach.
Right, but even if it's correct, it's eat right, die anyway. The best advice, that's why the gospel is so great, right? Because it's good news. They say it's good news, not good advice. And so advice, even the best advice, can fail. And so therefore, when we get into the advice business and we're not clear to demarcate that it's advice, then I think if that advice fails, it discredits Christianity along with it. And that is part of what happened in purity culture. Dating, there's nothing at all in the Bible about dating. Dating, it doesn't even exist in the Bible. So
let's talk about dowry and marriage transactions and what they probably won't. But.
You're creating, and he had all these rules, and 7 rules for this and 10 principles for that, very few of which came out of the Bible. So it's you live like this and you end up unhappy, which again, some people are just going to end up unhappy for whatever reason.
Anyway.
And all of a sudden it's that, when that wasn't even the Bible, right? You can't, so I think that was one issue that was very clear in it. The second thing was, it was very, very, seemed to be very much calling for men and women to be platonic friends, intimate, close, one-on-one personal friends without an intent towards romance or dating. It was sort of a friends first model. I just think, especially when you're young, when you put a man and a woman and they start hanging out.
Platonic friends. Oh man. So that's kind of starting with the friend zone, but all right, whatever.
Right. It's going to evolve. It may start out as friends. It's going to evolve in a different direction. And so, I'm kind of not high on male-female platonic friendships. So I think that
exercises and kidding yourself.
Yeah, and so I think that was another big issue with that. And then the other thing was they put such a high view on kind of marriage and purity that you ended up with kind of two alternate ways you could fail, kind of two ditches you could go into. Ditch number one was, I actually did have sex with someone, or I did something wrong, and now I'm damaged goods. There's no concept of
forgiveness,
for redemption and forgiveness. I think you could feel like, oh, I fell short of the mark.
That's where you get the born again stuff coming in.
And now I'm like worthless. The second one is we have to have such a high view of marriage that it sets expectations on a spouse and on another person and on this institution that nothing can ever fulfill. Right? You're never going to find that perfect, pure, person.
Man, that's what my buddy that I told you about earlier, who's like, he just turned 38. Well, no, that was in fall, but that's what it's like he's waiting for. And it's like, man, I tell him, I'm just like, man, I get it, but maybe you should just try like dating a human. You know what I mean? He's got everything there. And again, there's all the risks at this point for him, but it's just like, he's very like particular about that. And it's just like, man, maybe you'll find that. And it's like, if you haven't found that in church yet, then it's just like, maybe you got to be a little bit more realistic, To
be with, you're always going to be with somebody who's like a deeply flawed, sinful individual. And so I think you could end up waiting. I got to wait for the very perfect, ultimate, godly, pure man or woman to come along. And that's probably not going to happen.
And if they did, why would they want to marry me?
Right. And so let's be honest, right? When you're in your 20s, early 20s, it's a tough, awkward.
There's kind of another interesting, I guess, thought that comes to my mind when I think about that. And it's this idea of like, when it comes to virginity, it's like the virginity of the woman, I guess, is more coveted or more respected. And then men kind of have this different journey with virginity the older they get, where I guess more and maybe outside of the church for them, it's less respected, or you're seen as like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, and the women themselves don't respect that as much. So, I mean, you kind of have more of an emphasis of the purity with virginity going for women, where you have an emphasis of like lack of experience and maybe even a lack of masculinity if you're a man in the same way, and then when you think about it, if purity is associated with female virginity, then that almost in itself is kind of a pedestalization in a way, and it kind of sets up this sort of servant, sort of pedestalized relationship to begin with.
Time of life, from your teenage years through, say 25, that is a place people are discovering who they are. They're establishing their own identities. It's fraught with so many.
Maybe if you're gonna be a guy that does that, like, you have to have maybe a close brotherhood of other guys that really have the same values, like, and you're all virgins until marriage, and it's like those are your guys. Then you don't care about the rest of the prevailing culture, but they actually really need to have. I'm just trying to think, they need to have something like
any
that.
Difficult ways to navigate, shoals to kind of navigate, and so even in the best of times, right? That's a difficult time of life for most of us to be in. And so I think it was just a combination of so many factors came together, and enough bad outcomes of various sorts that people sort of said, oh, wait a minute, this just isn't working. You know what I mean?
So let me go back to an observation you made about certain cultural expectations that aren't in the Bible. If I went to something outside of the subculture, the subculture of the purity culture, or the subculture of evangelical Christianity, and just
aren't those monks? I mean, yeah, at a certain point, and the interesting thing about from what I've read about like Christianity is that someone who becomes a monk is like, they're on a higher level of honor than someone who gets married. But yeah, basically a celibate.
Talked about cultural values that resulted in women doing the dishes.
And then you think about like the effect that, they haven't talked about this, but the effect that like nudie videos has on these young guys too, because it's one thing for them to, stay out of that stuff in person with people, but then so many of these young guys too end up, they all got a cell phone or whatever, And I mean, my buddy, literally my buddy that I was telling you about earlier, that's 38, this guy has an addiction to that stuff. And I know, and he'll be like, well, it's better than going out and doing that. And I'm like, well, it's not helping you. You know what I mean? But to then go to church, you know what I mean? But then, every night you're also doing that. That's a whole other thing that they're dealing with.
And men taking out the garbage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just such a multifaceted problem, and there's just so many angles of things that have just happening that they got to contend with.
The Bible says nothing about men taking out the garbage. It says nothing about who's to hold the car door, who's to. It's there are a bunch of customs that 100 years ago our society at large had agreed upon as a way of keeping the gears of the machinery of society oiled.
Right.
Everybody knows what to do.
Right.
So you go to a dinner party, your wife takes a hostess gift because she knows what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And if someone said there's no hostess gift in the Bible, you're not a bad Christian if you don't take a hostess gift. That's true. It's not in the Bible. But what happens is if you don't have all this cultural teaching or set of expectations and all the trivial things, everybody has to come up with their own ad hoc version of it. And it seems to me that the purity culture, and there have been some other subcultural attempts by Christians to, in a time of disintegrating expectations, where nobody knows what the guy's supposed to do, what are men for, what are women for, what are we supposed to do, how are we supposed to go on a date, who asks, who buys, all of those things have evaporated. There have been various ad hoc attempts to sort of build a culture where people are oriented and they know what to do. But
a lot of those things evaporated. Who asks, who buys, this kind of thing. He doesn't say it, but what's kind of eviscerated those norms is you can say, feminism, basically, with women deconstructing the feminine role, wanting to be like men. Guys get confused, so I can hold my own door open, or I can get my own coffee, or whatever it is. But they're trying to reconstruct this, but it's just interesting that he doesn't mention kind of what took that away. Maybe he just classes it all under secularism.
But then when the larger culture turns on you and starts to make fun of your expectations, and some people grow up unhappy, it's pretty easy to dismantle when the fad passes. My question is, would you agree that men and women need to have cultural expectations for one another that are not in the Bible?
Well, that's a very good question. I would say clearly our culture has constantly evolving sets of norms. You're right. In, say, the 1950s, there was a more unified common cultural set of expectations around rules.
Right.
Now, I happen to believe a certain kind of conservative, evangelical, traditional conservative.
Robert says, play video games till someone responds to your shit post on FB. That's how to meet women. We appreciate you putting out some strategies out there for us.
Evangelical has overly idolized that.
I mean, it does happen nowadays. People meet online. People do meet online.
Suburban.
Leave it to Beaver
view of the family. Some have put that up as the Platonic form of the family, when in fact that is a highly atypical family structure for most of humanity. Historically.
See, he's talking, I think, about like the sort of 1950s mythology of the quote unquote modern American family, the stuff that we saw on TV.
Right. So but it was a time when there were more commonly agreed to social scripts. Today, and this is where I say,
and the laws were way different back then. There was no fault divorce. The child support system didn't exist. The federal child support system didn't exist. Probably prior to birth control, even, or just at the introduction of it, it was a different world. No social media, no dating apps.
The church needs to grapple seriously with changes in modern society. I did an entire series, or a couple of entries.
I'm glad he said that. Changes with modern society.
Changes in post-industrial society. The shift from pre-industrial to industrial society, the shift from industrial society to post-industrial society, and all of the vast array of changes that have happened in the structure of society, in the household. and also essentially all the changes that have produced what you might think of as the neoliberalization of relationships that have been so well documented by people like French novelist Michel Houellebecq, and the fact that we're just in this very transactional relationship marketplace, right? It's almost like it is a marketplace. OkCupid, Tinder, Match.com, these are marketplaces.
You know, and it's like a lot of the things about traditionalism is they're trying to get people to live in a way that suits like a different economic reality or different economic structure. Not just in terms of wealth, but like actually how like money is made, you know. And a long time ago, families weren't these individual family units that like as we know them today. They were larger clan structures. And marriages and who had control over those marriages and how they worked and how things were passed down, how land was inherited, how wealth was inherited, was completely different. And as the church evolved, they had a huge impact and influence over who got married and who didn't get married and who could get married and what was allowed and what wasn't allowed. And that helped to create a more unique European style family, which was a little bit more individualistic. It was a smaller unit away from the greater clan. What replaced the clan was the reliance on the church. So you have these individual units of families led by the father instead of a greater patriarch of a clan patriarch. And you kind of divided up the clans like this, but what held everybody together was the influence of the church. Then what happened is the church is put aside by the state, and the church kind of loses that influence and power. And our economics change, and you know, women can. There's other types of jobs women can work nowadays that are more suited to for a woman to be able to work them, like sitting in a cubicle or doing something like that. And they don't want to have to be a wife and, you know, rely on the guy for money. And then there's a further degradation of this individual family unit into like, I live here, you live here. The kid goes back and forth on a custody agreement. And that's where we are now, you know. What sort of mom's basement are they occupying? Check out the background. It looks like a studio of sort. It looks like a big room. See, that's a big room.
Places. There is no more till death do us part.
Correct.
We have all these different market. You know, have like the sexual marketplace of hookups. You can have the dating
sexual marketplace. Oh, that sounds red pillish.
The rules are constantly shifting. Hold on. Cupid, Tinder, Match.com. These are marketplaces. Okay. There is no more till death do us part.
You know, and what's funny, see, like he's going to talk about like, okay, this is a marketplace. That's a fundamental change. He's talking about covenant marriage, no more debt do us part. But I mean, listen, marriages all throughout even Christendom and before was a marketplace. And it was, instead of the sexual marketplace, it's the marriage marketplace. And this is where your system of dowries and bride prices interface with each other based off of the perceived value of each family marrying into each other or the individuals themselves. So it wasn't really just about the spiritual covenant. You know, it's like, there's the material aspect of life and there's the spiritual side of life. And the material aspect needs very real resource provisioning to keep alive. And that's where the dowry and the bride price tend to make sense, you know, to handle the material part. Now, once you got that contract figured out, you go over to the church or whatever your religious institution is and you get that sealed religiously. And that's where your spiritual aspect comes in, and both of those two things together make a marriage that's supposed to work.
We have all these different market, you know, have like the sexual marketplace of hookups. You can have the dating marketplace, the marriage marketplace.
There you go, marriage market.
The rules are constantly shifting all the time, constantly under our feet. It is a dynamic, disintegrating era, and one in which it is extraordinarily difficult for anyone, Christian or otherwise, to navigate that.
Right.
And so I think it's like there's like not enough grappling with the degree of difficulty in building and creating a marriage today. It's just so much harder than it was in a previous era.
Because testosterone isn't any different and estrogen isn't any different. Men and women are the same.
I mean,
it doesn't help that sperm counts are down by 50%. and that progesterones and other hormones are messing up women's monthly cycles because it mimics estrogen from all these microplastics that are in everything. So I mean, there's a little bit difference in kind of some of the hormones and stuff going on. Men and women reach puberty earlier, especially if you look at the data. It used to be 15, 16. We're looking at 9 and 10 now. So there's a lot of differences, and then it takes longer to get. It used to be you hit puberty and then you're working on the farm and then you got married like immediately. You know what I mean? And then it became, well, it takes a little longer to get developed. And now it's like, well, you got to go to high school, you got to go to college, you got to find a job, you got to save some money to try to afford a house, and then maybe you can get married. But puberty still happens. Puberty happens even younger, and you got 10 years of living through puberty of trying to figure it out to make yourself, marriageable, apparently.
Testosterone levels are falling.
Yes.
Maybe not yours.
There we go.
They're falling down almost 20% in recent years.
Yeah, but
sperm counts are in big decline too.
Although I think culture can.
Well, you know what? I gotta give them credit for bringing that up right away. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. Though they always look at sperm count and testosterone, but they're not looking on the other side of women. And I'm sorry to do this to you now, but I made a very specific video that discussed this because it got on my nerves that it's always with the guys that have half the sperm counts and they're not real men anymore. And I pulled the research. I did everything to show that those same problems, the same exact problems are happening to women as well. And it's all here in this video. I actually got 793 views. That's not bad. That's not bad. I'll just put it in here just because I'm excited about it. But I really did go into the research. I pulled out the research and we showed about what's happening on the women's side of that deal. So yes, men's sperm counts are going down, but women have a complementary issue that's happening on their side from the same thing.
Things like that, yeah. And obviously it is, but the testosterone itself isn't any different. Right. What it does, right? And what people find attractive. And so you've got all this the economic upheaval, pre-industrial, industrial, now.
That was the first video you watched me? Oh man, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure when, because I feel like I've been seeing you for like the entire time now. That's cool to know that was the first video. I'm glad to know that like it brought some subscribers over and stuff, but I appreciate you being here, man, honestly.
We're into the digital realm, service economy, digital realm, but people are still people, right? And so it seems to me from a Christian perspective, the secular world has no eschatology for what's happening. And Christians are divided on their eschatology about what's happening, but at the very least, it seems to us that we should say that the next 10 years are known to God, and God's law, God's word is a constant, that if I honor that, if I believe the gospel and honor the word of God and seek to live by it as a responsible adult, it will go well for me in ways that it wouldn't if I, honor your father and mother, that your life may be long in the land. That's a promise that I think we could claim now as much as 2,000 years ago, even though the economy is different. Honoring your father and mother pays dividends.
Yeah, I would say, I sort of look at it as...
he said, there's these similar things about human biology, but the economics are all different, and it's just like, well, yeah, but women are working. I mean, women go to college probably even more than men do now, and it's like they all want to have careers and do that. So things need to adjust. I mean, there needs to be very real changes that occur. Or are they going to tell the women congregants that, hey, do not put college on your bucket list. Worry about getting married first, raising the kids, then maybe after, if you got more free time, start doing that. And if they're not telling them that, then, well, living in that way is probably not going to work because they're still contending with these real changes.
Somewhat like the wisdom literature in that, in Proverbs and different places, you have all of these kind of principles for life. I don't see them personally as sort of a if you do this, good things will happen. That's what I call the prosperity gospel view of the family. That like if you are leading well, your wife will be happy and she will want to have sex with you. And if conversely, if she is not happy or does not want to have sex with you, that indicates that you must not be leading your home well.
Right.
That's what I call the prosperity gospel view of the family. It sort of says that we can essentially, through magic formulas and incantations, control outcomes.
That's an interesting concept he's talking about. Real quick, Robert says, women are maturing younger because our species is not at replacement rate. I have no proof or evolutionary evidence of this claim. I was like, wow, was that really it? That's interesting. But that's my hypothesis. I had 2 daughters. I mean, that would be interesting if there's like this kind of collective species intelligence that works unconsciously and it could just tell certain things. But I don't know. I mean, the population has risen dramatically. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's one generation. So even though you have a lot of people now, if they're not having kids, then it'll be a huge drop in population later. That's an interesting hypothesis. One is a millennial and the other is a Zoomer. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Kind of reminds me of that Jurassic Park John Hammond quote, "Life will find a way."
I don't believe that, but I think what is clear is that the patterns of living in the Bible are good. God didn't just create these as arbitrary laws and rules, and if we...
It's interesting because like in early Christianity, there was polygyny still allowed, and it really wasn't like formally outlawed until much later. I mean, priests could still have families up until a certain point when they made it celibate to once you be to be ordained. And it's like I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but I think the formal thing that makes Christians lifelong monogamous with no divorce is, I can't remember what verse, but the man and women becoming one flesh. And that is, it derives, I think, from that and the interpretation of that, even though it wasn't always like that. But then later on, the church authority looks at that and says, oh, that's what it is based off of that. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, he's saying these things about the law, but then there is the interpretation of the law. And I mean, there might need to be some wiggle room in order to accommodate all this kind of stuff. This absolutely happens with other species. I've heard of more, I guess, like earlier maturation with like hotter climates and just different environmental factors like that. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Align ourselves with that. We may have tribulation, but ultimately all things are going to work together for good.
Well, isn't it true that the prosperity gospel has a problem in that it treats Proverbs as though they were vending machine guarantees?
Right.
Like you do this and you get your product.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's something I just think when it comes to like the servant leader concept and complementarianism, it does seem to have an analogy to that, in that if something is wrong in your home, then it's always that you've been leading poorly. And it's
kind of what we talked about earlier. It's just like, well, if the divorce does happen or she does leave him, then it was the guy didn't hit one of the 3 P's correctly. It's just because he wasn't being a man properly.
Like if you lead well, things will go right. Whereas I would say that if something is going wrong in your home and you're the man, then you need to make it your responsibility to like do something,
to address it.
Whether or not it's...
I mean, but if you're a woman, I mean, you should still be held accountable. They do have agency, so again, that's kind of standard tradcon stuff. Well, it's on the man
to blame or not, but I don't think it's like, okay, how am I leading wrong? How am I not? So it's like, I'm not being enough of a servant leader. So I think we always are looking at, we're not being enough of a servant leader, and that is somehow the reason why our wife has this mysterious malaise, and like we're going through a rough patch in our marriage. So that seems to be, that's what I call a prosperity gospelish view that seems to look at it as the husband's leadership is the determinant factor in how everyone else behaves.
So
which I don't believe is the case. And that they might not be explicitly stated, but it is all but explicitly is stated in some cases.
What I would tag there is the prosperity gospel's problem is that it's a simplistic analysis. So you have something go wrong, you didn't start wooing your wife 3 days ago, or according to, you didn't do what this book said to do, and it's just a simplistic snap judgment. But when you say, why did I fail the test? Well, you didn't study.
Well, it could be, it could be your fault. I'm not saying that it means it's not your fault.
Right.
But this guy, Justin Buzzard, he wrote this book called Dating Your Wife. So I read it several years ago, and he's got a famous quote in there. It's like, men, here's like the lesson you need to learn. It's your fault. Women are not the problem in marriage, you are. Right? Men are the problem, men need to change.
This is the pull yourself up by the bootstraps thing.
And it's
like, it's just always
change
you.
the man, change the marriage.
Because the woman is this like pure virgin. And like, if you're a pure virgin, if you represent purity, there can be nothing wrong with you because you're like pure and perfect. You know what I mean? Therefore, why would it ever be her fault? So it's like there's this strange kind of obsession with that.
And to me, that was just like the encapsulation of sort of the complementarian view of how
Servant
things
leader.
work in the home.
Everything that's wrong with servant leadership is there.
Well, that's this in terms of the prosperity gospel aspect of it.
Robert says, wonky scientific information about senescence. You needn't share this with your viewers. There's no way this is 30-second conversation. All right, yeah, no worries.
I think it's overly like it's always something you're doing wrong. And so again, I'm a believer that if there's something going on, within my circle of responsibility, then regardless of how it got to be that way, then I need to act. Okay, so I think that's a valid way to put it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the blame is somewhere in the way that I've been leading.
So
it could be. I mean, I could be screwing up.
Yeah.
That's a possibility, but that's not the guarantee.
So you're distinguishing, if I take you rightly, between responsibility and blame. So if something erupts, let's say a husband has been a dutiful, perfect husband, and he goes to work and something goes south at home, some disaster that he had nothing to do with. He was praying for his wife all day. He was sweet to her before he left. There, in no way, shape, or form could that debacle at home be blamed on him. But when he comes in the door at the end of the day and he's confronted with a grease fire at home, who's responsible? Well, he's got to say what he's got to lead. He's got to take responsibility, not in the sense that this is all my fault, but this is my home.
Right. I mean, yeah, I'm living in the middle of this grease fire. Right. So unless I want to continue living in the middle of it, and unless I want my kids to still be living.
I mean, if you have the proper authority, then it's your responsibility to reset order there. But in problems where you are unable to exercise your authority because either the state's in the middle of that or she doesn't want to cooperate and there's nothing you can do about that, then, it's not going to work. It's not always a grease fire.
In the middle of it, I've got to do something about it.
Right.
So I think that to me seems like a more
responsibility versus blame.
Rational way.
And then at that point, it's like, as the earlier red pill stuff, it's like they always said like married red pill is the hardest, and then that's where you would see guys talking about like, what they did to try to fix a situation. And I think even for a lot of them, it was a high chance it wasn't going to go, but it was always some way of like basically stopping the kind of beta behavior, passing the shit test, the throwing dread game, doing some form of abundance mentality, even if it's just like going to the gym or if you're at dinner and not exactly flirting with it, but if you're getting attention from other women, that would help perk up the wife's kind of attention to the guy again and all these sort of things.
To think about it.
All right.
And so that's important.
Okay. Do you agree in your criticism of servant leadership? The people who advocate this would multiply verses, and those verses would be the Lord Jesus washing the disciples' feet, Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ. He who wants to be great in the kingdom has got to become servant of all, and so they can multiply verses about the servanthood part. I was wondering in the opening monologue, I mentioned Lewis's distinction between the old version of rulers versus our modern definition of leaders. if I were to say, where's the problem in that phrase, servant leaders, I would tag the problem with leaders. You know, I would
That's
say,
interesting. I mean, I think most of the critics would tag the problem with servant, and the emphasis is servant, and it's not on leader. I do think that because of the society that we live in, you know, the leadership model is essentially inescapable today,
right,
because that's the only socially and legally legitimate method
to get
that
anywhere.
that we operate in. And so we have to operate within the repertoire of actions that our society and our government and in our legal system, which we're called to be in subjection to the legal system, calls us to operate in. You know, I do think there's a lot of focus on the service aspect, which is definitely there.
Mm-hmm.
The most important questions I've never seen addressed in any of the writings on servant leadership that I've read. And the most important questions are things like, what service is to be provided, who decides what that service is, and who determines if that service has been performed well.
Yeah, and if all of that is basically your wife, then you know who's really in charge. And if she says, well, you're not being a good biblical husband, or you know whatever your flavor is, and she has the final say on that, then who's really in charge here? Who's at the helm?
Typically not addressed. It's similar to the passages that talk about Genesis. They'll say, what is it? Ezer is really like God is used for God.
And I know there's conversations about masculinity, but so far they've managed pretty well to not discuss anything from the woman's side or what they're doing. I wonder if they will. We're at 55 minutes. So probably 20 minutes more to go here, a little bit more.
Strong help. Okay, well, great. But the key question is, who determines what form the help takes?
Right.
You know, who determines that? What help should you provide? And so I think that
the answer could be the culture, you know, that you live in, but then at the same time, we have a certain culture now that maybe we don't agree with. And it could be, you know, economics and ultimately what resources there are to keep a community alive and how best to use those and in what manner maybe helps decide a lot of these things.
There's a lot of questions that are essentially swept under the rug and not really forthrightly addressed, and implicitly the answer is the types of service to be provided is to, you know, essentially your wife and family determine the kinds of service and are somewhat the
and wife and family, I mean, are the kids determining that? So it's pretty much just your wife.
Judges of whether you're doing it well. Whereas in the foot washing episode, Peter didn't even want his feet washed.
Right.
Jesus said, well, actually, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part with me. Yeah. So there's a sense that people didn't get to choose how Jesus chose to serve him. And if all authority is servant authority, how do we explain the authority of the Father over the Son?
Right.
He didn't exhibit, what was his use
Service.
of that authority? His authority over his Son was used to send his Son to the cross. And so I think one of the things that we end up with is, again, defining mission exclusively in terms of service to wife and children is what, coming out of that flawed definition of masculinity, is really where a lot of this gets sideways, because there's sort of an implicit false dichotomy that gets laid out. And I've seen it made explicit in some cases. It's like, okay, are you going to use your decision-making, your efforts as man of the home to please yourself or to please your wife and children? Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of like George W. Bush. Are you with us or are you with the terrorists? Mm-hmm. And so when you have a false dichotomy, it can be very powerful because one option is typically always presented as completely unacceptable. And so we see how that you're with us or with the terrorist essentially was used to undermine all criticisms of things like the Iraq War, which maybe could have used some more criticisms. So I look at that and I say, okay, this is a false dichotomy because there are...
It's an interesting concept, a false dichotomy. Maybe we could think of other false dichotomies that we see a lot in our culture nowadays.
Many ways that leadership can be applied other than to serve yourself or to serve your wife and kids. And my example would be, for example, when Tim Keller made the decision to leave Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia and launch Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York. Was he serving?
Now, I'm pretty sure the Presbyterian one is the one that it's more egalitarian based and women can hold, you know, like positions of leadership at the church, including being minister or pastor and all that
himself,
stuff.
or was he serving his wife and kids? He was serving neither. He was serving the mission of the church. He was answering God's call for the church. So that's what I talk about going on.
Maybe I got that completely wrong. I can't remember which one it is. Which one is the one that's egalitarian? I think he's saying an example that has nothing to do with that. So I don't want it to be, wrong. Presbyterian. Women's ordination is now non-controversial in the United Church of Christ, the Evangelical Covenant Order of Presbyterians. Okay. Ordains women as both teaching elders, pastors, and ruling elders. So I guess it was the Presbyterians.
Mission, right? And that is essentially a paradigmatic act, in my view, of Christian masculine action. Because you think about it, it's 89. He's going there in 89. The church is, the city of New York is a war zone at that period of time. Crime was horrible. In 1990, Time magazine did a cover story, The Rotting of the Big Apple. Okay? And so I think people know that. What they don't know is 2 or 3 other people turned the job down. They didn't want it. And what very, very, very few people know is that prior to Redeemer, the PCA had tried planning another church in Manhattan called Manhattan Presbyterian Church, and it limped along and failed completely. And not only that, the pastor and his wife who planted it got divorced.
Okay.
So you have a situation where here's a guy he's sitting here, he's just seen that the previous guy fell flat on his face and blew up his marriage. 2 or 3 other high wattage guys turned it down, and he's like, I'm going, right? So that that took brass balls. I think in his wife, in their marriage book, he said that was the most manly thing he ever did. And so I just wish something like that was set much more, because Keller, he is a servant leader, kind of teaching guy. I don't think he's correct.
I won't lie, I'm still not entirely sure what he's getting at, but let's see.
But, in the way that he lived and acted, he got it right.
In that instance.
That was it. It's like, I'm going on mission, and that's what we're using. This is what this family is for. And that was really, I think, just a powerful expression of embracing risk, danger, being in the arena. And, that's why he is where he is today, because he undertook that Christian mission.
How would an advocate, a typical, I won't ask you to put words in anybody's mouth, but how would a typical advocate of the servant leadership model, if you gave them a marriage counseling situation where the wife was out of control with her drinking, ran up credit cards, $100,000, had her credit cards taken away, would just open a new account, wouldn't listen to anybody. So the husband brings the situation to the elders of the church and says, what do I do here? There's a difference between giving your wife what she wants in a scenario like that. There's a difference between giving your wife what she wants and giving your wife what she needs. What would a servant leader do?
Well, that's an interesting one, because you get to another one of my principles, which is what I call a very influenced.
I'm very curious to hear what their answer is to that.
In this by Nassim Taleb's idea of skin in the game.
Yeah.
And one of the
skin in the game. I mean, because the first thing I'm thinking is okay, say he tries to exercise anything on her, obviously she can pull the parachute and just leave. And the church sounds like it's just mostly putting the onus on the guy. They're not going to do anything or say anything to the woman. So I don't know. I wonder what his
the principles
answer is.
I laid out in my newsletter is I only say things where I have skin in the game.
He and Doug Wilson did ask him about what a servant leader would do. So I think he's going to answer not what a servant leader would do, but what he would do. But let's see if he gives both. And
I'm congruent. I'm betting my own life on the things that I'm telling you. So everything I'm telling you in here is how I'm betting my own life. But what I would say is I don't believe that I have enough successful experience of marriage or childbearing yet to be conducting marriage counseling or childbearing tips. So
so he's not, but he did ask him not about how he would solve it, but about what a servant leader advocate would answer that. So he might have missed that a little bit.
Avoid those concepts in my sight, because I'm like, when I've been married for 15 more years or something like that, then I would feel much more confident going into a marriage counseling scenario.
Right.
But I feel like those are just very, very, very difficult, and it requires a lot of wisdom and, frankly, a lot of experience.
And I almost feel like he's basically saying, well, the guy has all the skin in the game, the wife doesn't. He has basically no authority. I mean, he doesn't have an answer about like what they would do. I wonder what the servant leader would counsel him. I don't know what the servant leader would say. It would just be like, well, you need to preach, some stuff to her more and get her to understand the error of her ways. Like what really would they do there?
That pastors do have. And so I usually would say, I'm not going to kind of go.
Man, that is a freaking nightmare. If you're married to someone and they're just spending and spending and spending and running up credit card debt and they don't got a care in the world and they just hate you and you're just married to this nutcase like that.
Into a scenario where I just don't feel like I have the expertise to speak.
Okay, that is understandable and admirable. At the same time,
I'll probably give this another couple minutes. I'm just curious to see what he's going to say, and then we'll look at some comments. There's no comments on this, but there is some on some of the clips that made it to YouTube.
You know the dynamics of how men and women, how people function, right? So if Paul says if a person is not willing to work, he shouldn't eat.
Right.
You're going to get, as some sage somewhere said, you're going to get more of what you subsidize and less of what you penalize.
Right.
Right. And if someone is saying that the wife, when mama ain't happy, ain't no one happy. And so the rule, the default rule is that your question was who determines whether the service has been rendered. If that person is always the wife, then at some point, is there a point where that isn't true anymore? Right, where the bartender in the servant leadership tavern cuts the person at the end of the bar off. Servant leadership is all very well, but not for you.
It could be. I mean, to be honest, I haven't run into too many situations like that in my own fairly.
See, I don't really blame him. I mean, I don't know how he can give an answer to that. I do wish. I think the answer was easier than it was supposed to be, and he interpreted it as Doug Wilson asking him specifically for how this should be solved. But he was asking him more about how would a servant leader, under the current servant leader philosophy that they have now, how would they counsel it be done? And he probably would say, well, maybe, he could probably go into the weaknesses of servant leadership and how it would be devastating for that situation. But, to be charitable, maybe he just doesn't know marriage counseling, even how the servant leader would do it. So, that's kind of weird. iTrevor says, the decline in stigma against premarital sex, with only 25% of Americans in 2018 believing it was always wrong, wow, compared to 48% in 1972, has correlated with the drop in the U.S. marriage rate. I bet you if you went to 1950, it would be like 70-something% probably. From 8.5 per 1,000 people in the 1960s to 6.1 per 1,000 in 2019. An increase in the median age at first marriage, from around 23 for men, 21 for women in the 1970s to over 30 and 28 respectively. Yeah, and I think that's even higher now. I think it's like for women it's 30 and men it's like 31, 32. By 2020, and a rise in the divorce rate from 2.2 per 1,000 people in the 1960s to 2.7 per 1,000 in 2019. Correlation is not equal causation, but surely there is something to it. I think a lot of it is just like how long it takes to be able to even get settled in the first place. I mean, and amongst other things like the culture and the ease of divorce that we got out here, and all these other things, but it's completely different now. And it's like, I don't know people. I don't think people are going to wait. They're going to be doing something, maybe like 0.001% of the population can do that. If they're like a real monk, or something like that. But most people are going to call it quits at some point or do something or lie about it. And if they don't do any of that, then they're going to be looking at the nudie videos online or doing something. Robert Spencer says birth control. That is one of many factors. Yep. Yeah, let's give this another few minutes. I just want them to wrap up that portion of the conversation. We're about an hour in, so it's an hour and 24 minutes, but I think we got the gist of it.
Really short marriage. You know, I think one of the things that I would advocate, you know, for men and how I operated for myself is, you know, if you're going to get married, and it doesn't help you're already married because you're married,
Right.
you have to say things like, okay, what's my mission? How do I want my house?
And it's like, you know, see, the thing is like he doesn't have an answer for it. Fine. I don't think Doug Wilson, I don't know if Doug Wilson does. Maybe he does, but he's the interviewer here, so he doesn't want to say. The thing is like, I feel like Red Pill would be able to give an answer, and that's why men gravitate towards it. You know what I mean? They would basically equate this spending money and doing all this shit and being out of control with just like a massive shit test from the wife. You know, and the guy's been bending over backwards, and nothing he's going to do is good enough. So he has to figure out how to just, you know, how to pass the shit test, apply dread game, and all these other things they apply. I mean, that sounded like such a bad problem that it might as well just be over. But let's say they were going to try to do something about it. You know, at the very least, Red Pill would try to give some strategies, possibly. But so far, we're seeing nothing here. You know what I mean?
Told to operate, and then seek out someone who is demonstrated.
Red Pill's a little bit more realistic about pulling the plug. You know what I mean? Even getting divorced from the guy's side. That might be a situation where the guy initiates a divorce. But these folks, as Christians, they're not going to want to take that. That's not an option for them. So, you know, if the wife plays by that rule, then fine. But if she doesn't, or she decides not to, it's still the guy's fault.
By her pattern of life, that she has a very similar outlook to you, so that you don't end up, you know, it's like if, you know, I'm dreaming of living in New York City and my wife's dreaming of living in Moscow, Idaho, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
And so you're inevitably going to run into problems. You know, I will say, look, it's just like any scenario. I can best phrase it in terms of business and any other scenario out there. If you're just a doormat, people are going to run right over you.
So that's not passing the shit test.
You have to be able to stand your ground in some scenarios, and certainly in your marriage, there's going to be any human relationship. There's going to be times
There's a line somewhere.
where you're just going to have to stand your ground, and it's up to us to decide, you know, with wisdom where those lines are, and to be able to handle it. But sometimes you just got to like hold the line and just say, I will not, you know, this is how I'm going to do it.
Okay.
All right. Well, okay. It looks like I'm going to move on to something else, but I mean, you know, I don't know how good of an answer that is. I want to find one. Okay, here we go. I got two of the clips from this on YouTube, so we can see what some of the comments are, just to see how people on YouTube reacted to it, because I'm going to find that interesting. I don't know. If I was a woman who didn't want the pain and consequences of pregnancy, that'd be pretty convincing. I wonder how many pregnancies have been had involuntarily exactly. Not involuntarily exactly, but mistakes. Or yeah, you mean like just unintentionally, right? Like maybe the birth control failed, or they're using a condom, or something happened. Probably a lot of them. I think that's how a lot of people just kind of, if they're not married, I think that's how a lot of people, some people even end up getting married like that, because suddenly she got pregnant, and then they're like, well, okay, yeah. I almost feel like that's almost the point of the status of girlfriend and boyfriend. It's like, oh, that's my girlfriend. And then you bring her around the family, like, oh, okay, that's his girlfriend. And then when it accidentally happens, there's this gray zone between like, oh my God, he got some random woman pregnant, to, okay, it was his girlfriend. They might as well tie the knot, you know, before she's showing or something like that. I've seen that happen before. Then there's other people who maybe, I don't know, it just ends up happening that way, where maybe he didn't really claim her like that. It was more of a casual, but she saw it differently. And maybe she's just like, I got baby fever and I don't care, whatever. I don't believe in abortion, and I'm just going to keep this kid. We were fooling around, and then that happened. So, I mean, I think it's more than we'd suspect, Robert. Mr. Pitts said self-improvement tradicons are just purple pillars that registered Republican. Yeah, I mean, I think overall, like from this, I don't think it was a bad interview. I'm just trying to get into the mind and the understanding of what kind of how they're seeing it, how the church is seeing it. I'd even like if I can find other religions that are having similar conversations posting it, I would watch that just to see what they're thinking and the difference in what their strategies are. I mean, I think this is a positive thing. They're trying to incorporate some of what the red pill and manosphere knows. I don't know if they'll be able to do it successfully. There wasn't really much talk about the women. It was mostly all about the men. You know, how the church fails men, but the lie of servant leadership. But at the same time, it's like it's all essentially failing a giant shit test from the women's side. And they're kind of held hostage because if the women just stop going to church, then that's a problem. And it really, you know, they're trying to survive, and where they're not the top dog, the state is. Secularism wins the day, or at least it's powerful now. But let's just see what it says here. It's great that we waited until the collapse of civilization to acknowledge that these problems exist. Oh man. Yeah, he's not wrong. That's why Father's Day, sir. Oh yeah. Okay, this is what Coke Addiction was saying. He's not wrong. That's why Father's Day sermons will bash fathers, while Mother's Day sermons are all flowery and praise. The Bible says that there is no love like a father's love that needs to be taught on Father's Day. Man, oh shoot. Oh, my bad. Caesar, again, thank you. Thank you very much for your generosity during this stream, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate all you guys for keeping this going, man. I love doing this stream on Saturday nights. It's one of the things I look forward to, and starting the stream and having some folks in there makes the stream fun. You know, even if it's a couple people, just makes it fun. So I appreciate you guys hanging out and, you know, us talking about this stuff. It's fun. It's fun for me. These guys seem cool, but I think they are still like what you said the other day, cosplay tradcons, and they don't even know it. Yeah, they are, you know, and that's where I get the sense that it's like, yeah, they're trying to incorporate some of this, what do you call it? You know, manosphere points and all the stuff that we got, because they know it attracts men's attention. And it just reminds me of a guy, it just reminds me of a guy that, or like the church trying to incorporate heavy metal, you know, and it's like, you know, there's a Christian version of it, or rap or something like that, and sometimes it seems kind of cringy, you know what I mean? I hope they can do it in a way that works for them. I really do. But I think you have the right of it, honestly. Shah, do you get a different version of YouTube comment section? I don't see Mr. Pitt's comment here. You know what, man? So I'm using this thing called Twidget right here. And this is what I use to get it on OBS. And sometimes what's crazy is I don't even see it come up in my YouTube studio chat, but it'll come up on the Twidget, which is very weird. So when I notice that, I especially try to put it on the stream. You know what I mean? But I've noticed some of them not come in, and it's very concerning. So there is something weird that happens where it kind of drops. Not throwing shade at all. Much respect, actually. Just had to call them as I see them. Yeah, I hear it, man. And you know, it's not even about throwing shade at all. And I definitely don't think you are anything like that. And you know, I'm not Christian or anything, but I do respect them for trying to be positive or figure this out and do all that stuff. And I know a lot of good Christian people that, you know, they value keeping their families together. And I hope they can figure it out. I mean, and you know, we live in a society where that is a prevailing belief system. Maybe not the majority anymore, but if they are another group that has influence over all this. And if they get their stuff figured out, they can lobby maybe some of these systems and work together to try to raise funds. Ultimately, it's going to go down to the money and lobbying. I really think so. I just hope that the platform that has that money behind them is actually good. Yo, Christian Hernandez, welcome in, man. What's cracking? Good to see you in here, man. I'm going to be wrapping it up soon. Not sure you've been watching for a bit, but I do appreciate you coming in here and saying hi. I always love what the audience is small. It kind of feels like you're just hanging out with the guys on a Saturday night. Yeah, same here, man. And that's like it's fun because you can have more of like a normal conversation. Like the bigger streams, of course that would be awesome and everything, but it gets tough, in the chat. I'm sure it gets tough. It's nice to have kind of thing where we almost all know each other. It is pretty cool. Yeah, it's, I don't know what you'd call it. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like very campfire, hanging out, telling stories. I'm Christian, by the way. Yeah, I mean, and I know there's a lot of different folks in here, so it's good to get your guys' expertise sometimes. I try to study religions, I really do, because it's one of the things that fascinate me. And when I was young, I kind of had this point where I'm like, I want to learn about all of them, just to have some more knowledge about it. I love reading about like niche religions too. I'm Muslim. I'm sure maybe there's some Jewish people in here too, and I want this to be a place where people don't have to feel intimidated because of their beliefs. And sometimes we might have to have difficult conversations, but I do want to be able to talk about stuff, but I don't want people to feel like they're being ostracized and not welcome here or something like that. That wouldn't be, I don't want to be that guy, because there's a lot of freaking chimps out there. I even got a sound effect for the chimps. Like, the next time someone comes in here and they literally poops in their hand, to like throw it at me or someone, like, I'm just gonna have to play the chimp sound and then ban them. And, if we ever get to the point where there's a lot more people, then I'll just have to make somebody a mod and say, can you please rule with the heavy hand and bring down the hammer and the axe very, very consistently. Oh, dang. Yeah, I can't bring up the emojis. Trevor has a 100 with the mugs clanging. I think birth control is killing our race slowly. More babies is the only way we survive. Yeah, that's true. And I mean, listen, you got abortion as well. Somebody commented on one of my dowry Twitter posts. Let's see if I can bring it up. And it was, I responded to him. I think he had a legitimate thing that he said. It's under replies. Oh, right here. So, I made a post under Peter Wright. He has a website called gynocentrism.com, but he's on Twitter also, and we follow each other. He's pretty cool. But this was like a post about the dowry, and I put some of the information there. And this guy says, with the downside of increased female infanticide, a good replacement is needed. And basically he's saying in the dowry times, sometimes women would, female babies would undergo infanticide. And what I said was the increased female infanticide is interesting to think about, especially in light of the fact that in America, one can find an abortion clinic in most places ready to assist in that. You can even find videos of women declaring they got an abortion as soon as they found out the sex of the child was a male. I've seen those videos where they're like, oh my God, I better do my part in fighting the patriarchy and get an abortion of this male child. It's crazy. I think we commit infanticide today at a far higher rate than we ever have before. In modern times, parents would make a decision to do this way before the child is ever born. So it's like if they ever brought dowry back, then that's what they would probably do. It's just an interesting thing, you know what I mean? Because it's like, it sounds really like even crazier what they used to do, and that's a thing they used to do. But it's like, it's almost like we don't hunt our own food, so we don't see the slaughtering of the animal. And there's a part where you're just like, oh man, but it's something you got to do in order to feed it. And like, I'm not saying that's what abortion is, but what I'm saying is if we found a way to sanitize this to where it's behind scientists in white lab coats in a sterile environment, and you don't even ever really see what happens, and it makes it look okay, but it's still not, you know what I mean? In a sense of like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, we're just so far removed from what's actually happening in this very compartmentalized way of living. Oh crap, I lost where I was. I wanted to go back to the comments just before I call it. I will go back to the comments because these are looking pretty funny. But yeah, birth control and all the forms of it. I guess you can say abortion being one of them. Christian says, I don't like it. I feel like Shah dropped sauce and there's not enough people here to appreciate it. Man, I appreciate that. Dude, I had the craziest thing with child support. Like I found some really good studies out of California, and I'm so excited to do something about them, and I'm just busy reading them. And it's like stuff straight out of the horse's mouth. And I got this really big story with it, but it's just like I want to present it right. And I would love to get that in a video here very soon. And maybe later on where people find it or something like that. I am grateful to be able to just do it and have some fun with y'all, but maybe someday. We had a little bit of luck. We were on Pearl. Coach Greg Adams reacted to me. How I love his channel, man. He's like, he's one of my heroes. I feel like Coach would be the only one where the don't meet your heroes rule doesn't apply. Like, I feel like Coach would be the hero that I want to meet. Robert says, and I mean human race, not some specific skin color or anything like that. Yeah. Well, this is a problem all around. I mean, whether if it's Korea or Japan, as India has gotten modernized, they're seeing an increase in divorce rate and all these kinds of things. Even across the Middle East, I was looking at stats for a lot of Muslim countries. Their divorce rate is 30-40% now too in a lot of them, especially the more industrialized ones. Really is a manifestation of the industrialization as well. The large streams become like an OnlyFans, pay to engage. Yeah, that's the tough part about all that, man. And I get it, and I obviously, like, it'd be a freaking dream come true to get big on YouTube and be able to have some kind of income from that. But I don't want to be, God forbid, I've seen so many examples of people who just get entitled with it. There were like some big stuff out of Twitch back in the day where some of the Twitch streamers would get mad at their audience because they weren't like donating or subbing. But I kind of look at this as like, I look at streaming and podcasting as like our generation's garage band. Back in the day, all the kids wanted to start a band or something, and now it's like everybody wants to do podcast or something. It's like fun, it's fun. Did you watch the Fresh and Fit debate? I saw part of it. Are you talking about the Muslims versus Christian debate? I did watch part of it. I was relatively unimpressed. Both sides just really wanted to win, and it was a real chimp out. It was definitely a chimp out. I'm sorry. I love using that sound effect. And, it's just a lot of insulting and stuff. There were some interesting parts, the Trinity or this or that. I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched part of it, and I was like, I think I get enough of it. And then you see on Twitter, and both sides are like, oh, my God, we destroyed the other or whatever. And now there's supposed to be another one. I think Andrew Wilson is going up against Sneeko and some other guy. And it's going to be more chimping. You know what I mean? And it kind of sucks. I hate that divide is there, but I get it. I guess whatever. It's cool. You know what I mean? Like, in the sense of like, I get, people got to talk about it, but there's so much just insulting and really chimpishness going on, and it's like, if you look at all three of the Abrahamic religions, they all got their dirty secrets. I promise you, you know what I mean? And that's just the way it is. But I tried to watch part of it. I did try to watch part of it. I'm an atheist. I want to adopt the Muslim diet so I can be as skinny as you are. Well, you know what it is, man. Every year I have a reset, which is Ramadan. And, I can't say I'm the most religious guy because, I should, there's a lot more prayers I'd have to be doing otherwise and things like that. And there are things that I do that are, would get me, you know what I mean? Just, it's not in line with what I'm supposed to be doing. But, doing Ramadan every year does help. And that is something I stick to every year that I do. And it's no water, no food, and amongst other things you abstain from sunrise to sunset for one turn of the moon. So that's like a month, about 30 days. And it does help. Now, if the sun goes down and you start stuffing your face with sugar and, carbs and all kinds of things, you're probably not going to lose weight. So it's important to maintain discipline at night also. Other than that, the Muslim diet really is the same thing as the Jewish diet in the sense of following the rules in Leviticus with the dietary prescriptions. Banhammer inbound. Yeah, I'm just going to have to find somebody. I don't want to put pressure on anybody to do that. I think we're good now. I can handle it. But if it ever gets there, I'd have to do that. I thought about making Robert a mod because Robert actually modded a libertarian group on Facebook that had like 30,000 members. But then I realized that a libertarian being a mod essentially means you don't have to do anything. Unless like it specifically goes against like the site TOS. Uh, Trevor, ketogenic diet, avoid carbs, drink lots of electrolytes. Yeah, let me tell you, I had a 6-pack, well, maybe like twice in my life. Once when I was working out very heavily, but when I was working out less, the one time in my life I actually got a 6-pack was when I was doing something more to the carnivore diet. And I'd have like eggs in the morning with a lot of butter. I eat a lot of butter. And I'd have like a ribeye at night. And then the only other thing I'd have is I'd make homemade kefir and I'd blend fruits in it. And that was like my sweet thing. And I would have that after my ribeye. And man, that got me straight real quick. That's like my ideal diet. And then eating fruit is like cool if you want to eat it. Shah's stream will definitely continue to grow. I hope he gets the massive audience he deserves. Until then, I'm going to enjoy the ride. Man, thank you. I appreciate your support a lot, Mr. Pitt, honestly. And I see you in like other folks' stream. I saw you in DL Saint. And I know, you're in coaches and everything like that. So I'm just, I'm going to keep trying and God willing, I can just get it. It's all about what you talk about and just trying to like talk about, not just interesting stuff, but being able to teach and wherever I can. My niche here is trying to share the child support knowledge, and that's the stuff I have fun with. And it's crazy. I don't even work there anymore, but I can't stop reading the academics about it. And this is stuff I did not have time to read while I was working there. But now I'm like looking up every scholarly paper I can find, and then I'm slowly putting it together. You know what I mean? You could always hire all of us to be your employees. That'd be pretty freaking cool, man. If I made enough money to pay you a fair and just wage, that would be the only way I could do that with all good conscience. Caesar, I saw, oh man, more. I just gotta shout this out real quick. Thank you again, Caesar. Cesar. For a second, I feel like I almost said it just like a Roman emperor. Shah, I've been meaning to tell you, you and my brother look like doppelgangers. I'll post a recent pic of him on Discord. Check it out when you can. You know what's funny about that? I got to get back to Christian. Christian, I'm going to get back to your comment. But let me tell you, I didn't go to Pakistan for the first time until I was 27. Okay? And with my siblings and my family, everyone's like, you guys don't look alike. But until they know that we're siblings, then they're like, oh, we can see it. And when I went to Pakistan, my brother was making fun of me because he was like, you look like every single random guy that's just walking around over here. Like, I look like the typical guy. I'd be interested to see that picture, though. Sometimes people send me pictures of people I look like. I think I got a lot of doppelgangers around, though. Let me get back to Christian. Says, Andrew Wilson debating Sneeko is like shooting baby with the rocket launcher. That's how I feel about it, too. At this point, they're just kind of... Like, well, Sneeko has a second guy, and I know Sneeko can be a bit explosive in debates. So, I mean, if anything, he might tank it, but, who knows? Maybe Sneeko's different now. Maybe Sneeko has a redemption arc. They're going up against an A-class level debater, you know what I mean? Which is in the form of Andrew Wilson, who definitely has a bone to pick with that side of the aisle and will pull out every single stop, and his entire reputation probably depends on this, because his audience is obviously, Orthodox Christian guys and even regular Christians. So, for me, I don't know if I'll watch it live. I'll probably just look at clips. I might watch, you know what? If I watch it live, maybe I'll stream it maybe we'll react to it on here. We can do a reaction to the other one, but just so you know, this is going to be a sort of stray from the normal stuff we talk about. It's not going to be family law oriented. There's probably going to be stuff, they're going to obviously bring up, the prophet's youngest wife. I could maybe have some discussion about that too. There's an article I would share about that and some other things. But, if we do that, then we all got to be, as mature about it. But that's probably what that would entail. Though I can see the appeal in doing it. Yeah, libertarian mods just ensure the TOS doesn't get... Exactly, yeah. So I don't know if Robert's mod style would be would be suited. I would prefer a mod with the heavy hand. And it's not even about what they're saying is... What I don't want is disrespect in the chat. That's really what I don't want. Because I don't want the people who have been here... I just don't want people to feel like... I don't know, man. I don't like people I just don't like bullies. That's what I don't like. And like every bully just needs to get removed regardless. But they all, yeah, let's see. but they also complain about the TOS while they're doing it. Yeah, libertarians are a fun bunch. I know I did. I posted it. Look at it when you can. You know, I'm gonna pull it up right now just to see it. Oh my God. I'm not gonna show it on stream. If you're in the Discord, you'll see it. You know, I'll put the Discord invite back in there. Dude, it's the beard. It's something. He has a very similar build to me. I'll say that. Like, he's got a very similar build. And if I got that exact haircut, dude, my barber is literally well, he's in Egypt right now, but he's been, the guy who cuts my hair, he's been in Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and he's in Egypt, and he's not getting back until like a week. But I feel like showing him that picture just to freaking be like, just to get the haircut so I can come back on stream and then do a comparison. Dude, man, I bet you the ladies like that guy. That's all I'll say about that. He must get all the ladies. A companion stream it. And just to be sure, a companion stream is when they're doing it live, right? So if they do it live, because if I do a companion stream and I'm reacting to it live, then that means I will have to do it at the same time that they do the stream. So it probably won't be Saturday at 7 is all I'm saying. So I could probably do it. Come on, bro. Watch it. Okay, Arthur really wants it. All right, listen, this is what I'll do. If it's streamed at a time while I'm not at work, so if it's in the evening, my fear is that I think the last stream started at 3 o'clock. And I usually get home around like 4, so that might be a problem. If I can't catch it live, I could possibly come home early for this. If you guys really want to see it, maybe I could put it in the Discord, and depending on who can show up or not, like my job, it's not like I can just leave whenever. It's not even like that. You know what I'm saying? So I can potentially do it. It just really depends on the timing of when they do it. It would be cool to see it live, I guess. I can get that. I'm gonna watch Andrew's debate anyways. Okay, yeah. So you'll probably, I'm sure he'll be streaming it on his side. If the scheduling works out, then I'll make it happen for you guys, and I'll put it in the Discord if it works out. I'll put it in the Discord just so you guys know, or I'll make a community post maybe. We have enough toxicity on the internet. We need to protect our safe space at all costs. Yeah, hell yeah, we do. Just don't talk a lot over it. Okay, yeah, I got it. Yeah, as long as I don't get a copyright thing, that's the only thing. Because the annoying thing is, so like if I show you, crap. So like here's the YouTube studio. If I'm not talking or stopping enough, what'll happen is you'll get a warning right here. But it only happens on some of them. So if they set it to where I can do it, oh crap. Oh, thank God. I thought I showed them already. I did this for 2 seconds, but it's gone. All right, beautiful. Yeah, so maybe we'll make that happen. Let's just look at a couple more comments real quick, just because I want to see this, and then I'll look at the rest of the comments on your guys' end. We'll call it. As a 27-year-old dude, grew up without a father. This is dead on. Since the time I started paying attention to the sermons, and even now, Mother's Day, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Father's Day, you need to do more. Damn, there's a lot of comments about the Father's Day, Mother's Day thing. Coke addiction was right. Something I've always noticed is a difference is addressing morality. If a man is immoral, he's a pervert who needs to stop. But if a woman is immoral, she always has good reason. For being someone we are supposed to sympathize. She needs love, didn't have a good father. These are about the same thing. We'll just read this long one. I have gotten into 2 physical altercations with 2 different pastors. Okay, this sounds interesting. Who tried to control my family through the back door called my wife. I reminded those pastors that everything went through me first. Don't criticize the head of the house behind my back. One of them said that Jesus was in him, and I straightforward told him that he didn't have enough Jesus in him, and that I was going to beat the devil out of him. Oh, damn, this was getting kind of wild. I am the head of my household, and that I was the one that had to answer to the Lord for my family. Wow, that one was pretty wild. We have enough. Correct. Companion streams are done while the original content streamer is live. I'll try to do it. I'll try to do it. So long as it happens if it's at like 3 o'clock, I will come home early to do this. And I will kind of disclaim this with, I will put a little disclaimer that, I'm not like the expert in both of it, but I've obviously grew up being Muslim. So where I can, and I am obviously, I try to read it, you know what I mean? And read a lot of parts of the Quran. I try to read different scholarly things, but I will admit, like, I'm not the most knowledgeable. So when they get probably into very specific doctrinal things, it might be challenging for me, but I'll just be honest about what I know or don't know. The other thing that I can show you guys is literally this right here. You see what this is? This is a heart rate monitor. And you wear this over your heart, and I can show you on the screen what my live heart rate will be. I just need to replace the battery in this. And if I can do that, God, I still hope I have my same account, because I don't know how I'm supposed to connect this thing. You can watch me react live to the debate, and you can see my heart rate rise and fail as these guys like insult what, I believe is sacred at certain things. But, maybe they'll be gentlemen about it. So maybe I can get the heart rate monitor going, and we'll see how that goes. We are obviously Mexican, but when he and I were in Ukraine to get my son, everybody thought we were either Turkish or Middle Eastern. That would make sense. I mean, I know a lot of, I grew up even with Mexican guys that I'm like, dang, there's like some weird similarities here. I've been to Mexico too. It's kind of interesting. Maybe it just has to do with like where you are relative to the equator. And I know a lot of like half Mexican Middle Eastern people too now. There are a lot of Mexican Muslims, even at the mosque, that I see so many Vietnamese Muslims, Mexican. Obviously, there's always been a lot of African American Muslims that I've known and grew up with. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how things evolve and how the society is moving forward in that way, and how communities come together and things like that. But yeah, I have seen, when I was in middle school, I remember this buddy of mine. His name was Alan. I still remember his last name too. But I thought that guy was Middle Eastern at first. And I'm usually good at spotting the Middle Eastern and being right and not getting confused. But he was full-blooded Mexican. So he got me. Do you browse YouTube via subscription list, homepage, or video recommendations? For me, I use bell notifications on a few channels, yours included, and homepage. To be honest, I've never actually used the subscriptions tab, and I forgot it was there. I always use the recommended. But most of the time I'm watching it on my TV, so I'll use the homepage, or sometimes I'll look at gaming, but there's not really much there. Because I do like gaming content sometimes, like random speed runs and things. But for the most part, it's just the recommended. I've never actually really used the subscriptions page, to be honest. Few people I have like notifications set up for subscriptions. Looks like oh God, Robert. There's no way that debate will be respected. There's no way. Yeah. At best, what I think I can do is just try to pick out things that maybe don't sound right to me, and I can say, hey, this is what it is. And it's going to be blood sports, gladiatorial. It's going to be this, man. I'm sorry, but it's going to be two troops of chimpanzees coming together and just screaming. Muslim rule over Spain 700 years. That's probably why. Yeah, there's some interesting things there. Like as far as loan words go. So like in Pakistan, to say money is basa, and then in Mexico, like the name of the currency is peso. And I've always wondered if there was like a relation there. But yeah, I think you can even see it in some names and stuff like that. That probably does explain most of it, to be honest. They'll likely start the stream during their usual time slot for the day show. Okay, 5 p.m. Eastern to as late as 8:30. Yeah, so I'm 3 hours back, so that would be 2 o'clock. Okay. I just got to figure out what day it is. I can probably make it work. And it's like 99% I can do it. So, I'll do my best to make it happen for you guys. I really will. And then, as soon as I know I can do it too, what I'll do is I'll put a premiere on. I mean, their premiere will probably only be a day, and then I'll put a premiere like within half a day if I know I'm going to do it. So at least you guys can see it, and I'll put it in the Discord. So anyways, yeah, that's the promise I'm making. Let me, and Pulsoid.net. That's my heart rate monitor. Damn. Oh, man, I can hear my cat. Man, I'm going to bring my cat on stream just for a second before I end it, just so I can get some valuable footage of her that I can refer to years later. Yeah, she's been upset, man. She's just like, where you been doing this whole time? Scott, there she is. Tell work you have more important things to do. Yeah, exactly. I'm just gonna be like, listen, sorry guys, you don't need to know. It won't be a big deal. I'll be all right. So it'll start at 2. I know what their streams, I might be wrong, but I know that they start their streams typically, and what they do is sometimes it takes them a half an hour to get going, but I'll try to start it exactly at 2, and then we'll probably have to wait for a half hour. Or I can start it like as soon as the debate runs, but I'll figure that out as we get closer. Thanks, Shah. Great stream. Hell yeah, man. I appreciate all you guys being in here. I can't wait to go eat something because I haven't eaten anything since breakfast. But guys, again, this was a fantastic stream. And again, big thanks to all the donations. Very generous of you guys. And, I'll try to honor that and not waste the cash or anything like that, and see what we can make better about this. But yeah, you guys have a great Sunday. I just can't wait to go out and fly my drone tomorrow and do a bunch of amazing things. What's up? What's up? You got something to say? You got something to say? Yeah. All right. See you guys. I'm going to cut the stream, and I'll see you guys later.